Is that correct, Sadie?
Yep, correct.
Thank you. Okay, so if all members can please switch, and also members of the public, please switch their phones on to silent. That would be much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, going through the minutes of the meeting. Okay, number one, apologies for absence and substitutions. We have apologies from Councillor Peter. On this side, do we have any other apologies? No, nice to see you, Councillor Canesco, that you made it on time. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so moving on to number two, declarations of interest. Does anybody have a declaration of interest that they wish to declare now? No? Okay, they can do so at any time during the meeting. Please just raise your hand and let me know. Okay, then we can get it sorted out. Number three, I've been advised there are no urgent matters. Unless anyone has anything to discuss, then we'll crack on. No? Great. Okay, number four, minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd and the 16th of September. Okay, they were attached to the paper. Does anybody have any comment on the minutes? Okay, certainly.
Please, if I may, Chair. I do recognise that minutes always have to be very brief, but there were an awful lot of comments made about the individual sites. I'm a little bit concerned that the minutes are particularly brief. I'm not suggesting we change them, but I would like assurance from officers and from the portfolio holder that a more extensive set of notes were taken that reflect our comments, and that this won't be the only point of reference in the future. Obviously, the portfolio holder's not here, so if I could just have that noted.
Yeah.
Was he nodding?
And he's saying that
Thank
yes,
you very much.
there were.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Wonderful. Councillor McCormack.
Essentially, that was my point as well.
Okay, all right.
8+ hours of meeting, there's not a lot to show for it.
No, but there we go. Okay, but we do have an assurance from the portfolio holder that copious notes were taken, and they are there. Just before we move on, so therefore I would like to move the minutes of the meeting, the two meetings. Okay, if we have no other comments, do we have a seconder? Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Watts.
Chair, it only says the minutes from the 2nd of September. It doesn't say the 16th. Well, it says it reconvened, but at the beginning of the heading it says the 2nd of September.
Yeah,
Is
certainly.
Is that the same meeting, is it? Or?
Sadie.
It's because it was an adjourned meeting, so it's counted as the same meeting, and so therefore you'll have finish times for both of them, but you don't write that it's the two meetings, because it was one meeting.
Okay, everything all clear? Great. Okay, great. Okay, so I'd like to move the minutes. Do I have a seconder?
Oh, that's it.
Councillor Canesco. Okay, thank you very much. I will sign those during the course of the meeting. Okay. Before we move on to number 5, okay, I just would like to say a personal note. I don't know if members are aware, but Sadie here will be leaving us, okay, on the 19th of November, and I'm very upset because she, for the last couple of years, she has been literally my right-hand person. Okay, I'm a person to go for, and she's done an absolute sterling job, and I'd just like to thank her for that on behalf of the committee. Just for people's information, she's offered Pastures New into West Berkshire, okay, on a promotion, okay, which is fantastic. And whilst I'm very sad to actually lose her, I'm sure she will be a benefit to West Berkshire Council. And I'd just like to say thank you very much for all the hard work you've put in over the last couple of years. Thank you. Okay, moving on to number 5, fire safety and the building. Okay, so we have the paper, and I would like to hand over to Councillor Tristan Robertson to do a quick introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, members. I'm joined on this paper by Chris Williams, who's our Interim Regulatory Service Manager, who's helped author the report. So the report tonight builds on a motion to full council a couple of years ago now, a few years ago now, in the aftermath of the Grenfell Tower fire. Clearly, at that time, there were a number of residents who are very concerned living in high-rise buildings in Basingstoke, so it was vitally important that the council did everything that they could to reassure those residents and to act swiftly in accordance with government guidance to identify any issues that might have been present. So the Council has complied with all of the requirements for reporting to the Minister for Housing, Communities and Local Government, which is no longer true because it's the Minister for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, I think. That included identifying residential buildings over 18 metres high and the cladding systems used on those buildings. We've also worked very closely with the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Service to support and advise building owners of high-rise buildings. The Council has lobbied government at the request of members to support leaseholders and owners with the immediate and future costs of providing fire safety systems to make sure that residents are not adversely impacted wherever possible. As portfolio holder, I've attended a number of meetings with residents, particularly in Crown Heights, together with our local MP Maria Miller, to provide updates and respond to residents' concerns and questions. At all times, it's been really important that the Council has provided accurate and clear communications with all residents to reduce uncertainty that's arisen from this. Working closely with building owners, we've identified that in the longer term, some buildings will require the removal and replacement of cladding systems, and in the short term, that there needs to be improved fire detection systems and revised evacuation procedures, and in a number of blocks, some of that remedial works has already taken place, which is good to see. Other work will also be required, including mitigation of other fire risks, such as lack of fire breaks or the replacement of combustible balcony floors, which is a particular issue at Winterthur Way, which is reported in the Basingstoke Gazette this week. We as a council will continue to do what we can to support residents and indeed building owners with advice and guidance as these works are undertaken over the coming years. I don't know if Chris has got anything to add.
I can.
Yeah.
Thank you. You certainly covered most of it there, Councillor Robinson. I just thought I'd give a slight update to some things that have happened since the report was published. Most of it's resolved around the Winterthur Way development. Paragraph 4.2 refers to an estimated completion date of works is May 2022. That is now estimated as early 2023 by Winterthur Way. We also refer to in 4.3 the birch and fir blocks in Winterthur Way. These are the two that are below 18 metres, significantly below 18 metres, but at the time of the writing of the report, we weren't sure what Hampshire Fire and Rescue's view was. They've since inspected these, and their view is that they're safe at the moment. They're satisfied with the mitigation works in place and the management of those blocks. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Certainly on the paper itself, it is for noting, Chairman, but very happy to take any questions that the committee might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Okay, I'd like to open before we actually open the floor up, Chris, there was an email that was sent around this evening. I don't know whether everyone received it, which was correcting a table. Okay, do you just want to take us through that, please?
Sure. Yeah, it was two minor issues where we've just changed the wording. It was managed by before. We've changed it to managing agent to make that hopefully a little bit clearer. And yeah, there was a mistake on the original report. My error. We put Victory Hill Management Company as the managing agent when it's actually Cheney's who do so. Victory Hill Management Company or the Residents Association there.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to open the floor up to questions. So, Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question for the portfolio, I guess. I did note that you had some exchanges with MPs and ministers. So I just wanted to ask if you had a further update on those and how much further were we to a financial solution that does not involve the leaseholders being exposed to significant financial outlay.
Thank you. Yes, this has been a matter of significant debate in Parliament, and as you know, the Royston-Smith amendment unfortunately was not taken forward, but a number of MPs continue to take that forward, and we hope that there will be money forthcoming from the government to do that. At this time, I'm not aware of a change of position. Certainly since the initial response to the inquiry from Grenfell, there has been more money forthcoming from government through various different packages than was originally envisaged, which is good. But I think around this committee, I'm sure we would all agree there is still a long way to go.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Vaux.
Thank you, Chair. So just following up from that, so I've got two questions really, but first of all, it says on page 6 of 14 or page 20 that First Port were hoping to get 5.5 million from the central government funding, whereas elsewhere in the paper they had said they got some funding. So I just wondered, did you know whether First Port had got it? If you didn't, then that's fair enough. I just wondered, given this was September when it was written. And then the table 2.1.3 talks about two buildings that are owned and managed by Vivid Housing, and I appreciate that's a different process, but I wondered if you had any information about those buildings. Thank you.
I think I'll probably pass to Chris on some of the technical detail.
Yeah, the two managed by Vivid, you're quite right. We would leave it to them to manage. From what I understand, there's no issues there with the external wall systems, but yeah, I mean, one of them, for instance, is Oak Ridge Tower, which built in the 60s. It's all concrete, so it's perfect for this type of thing. So it doesn't look the prettiest, but it's very good for fire resistancy. With regards to it was Crown Heights, wasn't it? Yeah, I believe they have got that secured, but yeah, I think what the report was saying, that at the time we spoke to them, they were still hoping to get it, but they since have secured that.
Wonderful. Councillor Canesco.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a few further questions around Section 4, if I may. So it's a 4.1 Crown Heights. We talk about the actions, and as Councillor Vaux has said, the funding that First Port have got. The end of that second paragraph says that the costs of the Waking Watch are likely to have been funded by leaseholders because it didn't qualify under the funding. Wanted to get a sense of how much that cost was likely to be and whether that's been passed on to the leaseholders so far. A couple of points lower down, again talking about some of the remedial works that are being done, and it's not envisaged to be completed within 2 years. So sort of what happens in the interim? Are the fire service comfortable that what's in place at the moment is good enough? And from the perspective of the residents, are they able to sell, or are new owners able to get mortgages for these properties whilst we wait 2 years for these fixes to be made?
Thank you. I'll take your second point. No, I won't. I'll take your first point first. On first point, at First Port, I believe the costs for the Waking Watch were still met by the leaseholders. Chris said he asked them to confirm that was today, but we can provide that by follow-up. They were significant costs. There's no getting away from that. There were significant costs, which were met by the leaseholders in the interim. On the remedial works, yes, they are taking a long time to complete. In the meantime, Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Service are comfortable that the buildings are safe. And one of the things that has changed recently, and this is a piece of government guidance, because this is obviously a national issue, not just a Basingstoke issue, is that if the remedial works are planned and they are scheduled in, then those properties are mortgageable, and that's our understanding at the moment.
Okay, I have a question just following on from Councillor Canesco's. Okay, do we know what is the reason for the remedial work to take such a long time? I appreciate obviously the people are applying for funding, but are there any other reasons, okay, that we're aware of?
Yeah, there's, from what we can gather, the funding is taking a long time. That's the reason for the delay at Winchester Way, for example. They've got everything in place, but they haven't got the funding actually in their bank account, and that's why they have to delay, because once they start the works, the interim payments become due, so they can't go ahead without those. This type of work, as you can imagine, especially for Crown Heights, for example, is huge. They need to replace every single external cladding to the whole of the 4 blocks of Crown Heights, whereas Winchester Way, it's just the balconies that need doing. So that's a huge piece of work. There's only so many people, so many companies in the country that can do that type of work, and because of this type of thing, they're in high demand at the moment. That's even forgetting the planning of it, the actual, going through the planning system, the actual planning stage, and it's just a huge complex piece of work. So it is a long time, but I do think it's unavoidable.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson. Oh, okay. No worries. Thank you. Has anybody else got any more questions? Oh, okay. Councillor Carruthers, please.
Just a brief one. Just wondered who is communicating with the residents of these buildings, and are we as a council overseeing those communications to ensure that our residents have got the information? I mean, you say here that Hampshire and Isle of Wight have now said that these buildings here, the ones you mentioned in 4.3, are now safe. You know, who's telling the residents about that, and are we sort of getting a chance to get their responses?
The ultimate responsibility for informing residents is down to the managing agent for that building. They have the legal responsibility, if you like. We as a council have taken a proactive view, which says actually this is clearly a very sensitive and serious issue, and we need to do a lot as well. So I've attended a number of resident meetings with Crown Heights. I know Chris is attending a meeting in a couple of weeks with the Winterthur Way group. Local councillors I know have been involved. Councillor Koneshko, Councillor Mamalanani, for example, have been involved in a number of resident groups as well. So we as a council are taking a proactive approach wherever possible to make sure that we are liaising directly with residents where we can. But equally, Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Service have a statutory role around that as well. So residents, rather than just getting information from the managing agent, who 99 times out of 100 will be doing things the right way, but that wouldn't necessarily be seen as the most reassuring to residents. Actually, what we found is the importance of the fire service giving that information directly has been really valuable, because actually, you know, if the person who owns the building says, oh, of course my building's okay, that's one thing, and that's not to say it isn't. But clearly, if you've got a trained fire service professional saying that, then that's somewhat more powerful with residents, and that's something that we've found incredibly useful.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Okay, Councillor McCormack, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the portfolio holder's response has raised another question. To what extent have the ward councillors been involved in this?
So in some wards more than others is the blunt answer. Certainly with regards to a number of the town centre blocks, right from the outset of the process, there's been open and direct engagement with myself as portfolio holder at the beginning when some of these issues were identified, and then directly with the team, equally teams from housing and building services, and the internal team of officers that was set up covered building services, housing, environmental health, and a range of other services to see what issues and what solutions we might have. So ward members have been involved as and when. Some ward members have wanted to be more involved than others, you know, and that's not a criticism. You know, it is a very process-led system, and some councillors are involved in residents groups, for example, and others aren't. So that's been the way forward.
Councillor McCormack.
I'm conscious that at least 4 of these are in the Brookvale ward that's got 3 new councillors as of May. So I'd like to ask if they could be involved and given whatever assistance possible, as this is an ongoing thing. We're discussing at committee tonight, and I'm sure that all 3 of them would really want to be very proactive in that.
Very happy to reach out.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Any more questions from the committee to portfolio holder? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, one quick one. Given that Grenfell Tower was, as I understand, sort of up to the building standards at the time, are we confident that our building and environmental health team are the appropriate people to actually sign this off? Who is it that signs off the remedial work, and is it worth getting it independently audited by industry experts?
You saved the best question till last, Chairman. That is the number one question that is on everybody's lips, and at the risk of making some very blunt statements, I don't care which government it was, whether it was red, blue, yellow or whatever, whichever government it was which allowed developers to go external for their building control and not go to a public authority for their building control, that was the wrong decision. And that was the wrong decision at the time, and that's not resulted in the results that we want to see for our residents. Certainly on the sign-off procedures, you know, the law is the law, and that can be the council's building control, or that could be an external building control company who does that. You know, a number of developers here have used external building control as they are entitled to do. We can cajole, we can persuade, we can encourage, but ultimately those options are available to them, but it will be assessed in line with the current guidance. And I think, you know, unfortunately I don't make the law.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Yeah, certainly, Councillor McCormick.
I keep on getting more questions as more gets spoken. So I think it's universally accepted when we've discussed it at council engagement panels right at the outset, at DC, various other things, that the building regulations that were, I think it was the 1980s when they were last substantially changed, are really obfuscatory, really hard to interpret, basically need ripping up and rewriting again. Is that likely to happen soon? My observation is that looking at these blocks that we've got over 18 metres in height, 5 out of 6 have been built in the last 20 to 25 years using these regulations and using modern materials. And yeah, I take on board, you know, it's not the government at the time, it's existing legislation, there's all sorts of things that we need to look at. But now we're aware of this incredibly acute problem, you know, as evidenced nearly 5 years ago now by tragic loss of life. I'd like to think that was, you know, there's going to be a rule change as a matter of urgency. Can we have that assurance that that is what the government is going to do as a result of your correspondences with the ministers? Because looking at that table, there's one building there that's built over 50 years ago that's likely to be the safest of the lot. And I think that speaks volumes about where we are. And indeed, Grenfell, when it was built in 1971 or whatever, was an intrinsically safe building that had learnt the lessons of Ronan Point, was a concrete, self-contained flat structure. And then they put a load of flammable cladding around the outside.
Councillor Robinson.
I can't speak for the government clearly, but I'm very happy taking the view of this committee to write to our local MPs and the minister responsible to call for a review of building control regulations, etc., in light of these issues which have arisen. Very happy to do that and circulate the response when it's forthcoming to committee. I think that's probably the most constructive thing.
Yes, please. Thank you. Are there any more questions from councillors? No? Okay. Just very quickly summing up. Okay. The paper was, I know it was for noting, but I prefer the words review and comment. Okay. The committee have obviously expressed a view that while work is ongoing, Chris, and please thank your team, okay, and anybody else, Tristan, that isn't mentioned, okay, we do need to keep on top of this, and we gladly note that Councillor Robinson will write to our MPs, okay, regarding the building controls. Okay, thank you very much. Okay. So if we now just have a short break while we just change. I think if anybody needs a natural break, now is the time to do it very quickly. Okay, while we get everybody through. If members want to take 5 minutes, okay, then I'm happy to do that. I decided to actually pull, members, okay, forward. Okay. Okay, so if we move on to the implementation of First Homes, again is welcome, Councillor Bound. Okay, it's always good to see you. But if we'd like to kick off with Councillor Robinson, okay, to introduce the paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. As you mentioned, I'm joined by Councillor Bound, Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Communities Planning and Infrastructure, Kate Randall, Head of Housing and Social Inclusion, Tom Roworth in the Housing team, and Matt Velville from the Planning team. The paper before us tonight is something which I think is really exciting, actually, the implementation of First Homes, which is a new scheme which comes forward from the government to help people afford their own home in our borough. And we know in this council that helping residents achieve their dream of home ownership is a key priority for the council. A sizable proportion of our residents aspire to own their own home, however their incomes put them just beyond the reach of traditional home ownership. The new First Homes proposal is a new form of tenure which provides low-cost home ownership for people locally, and the paper before us considers the guidance put forward by central government and is an interim position prior to the local plan update, where we can consider a more local policy approach to meeting affordable housing needs. And I think for me that's the absolute key part of this. First Homes is now a government policy and we need to have our own local policy for applying it. I think what we have in this paper is a good start, and I think the officers have done a really good job in getting us to a point where we can get stuck in and start moving this forward. But I also think it's quite timely in the context of the local plan update coming forward in the next couple of years, which will be led by Councillor Bound, to make sure that actually we get this in place, we see how it goes for a year, 18 months, and then we can put our learning points into practice through the local plan update. So this isn't fixed, this won't be the position for the next 5 or 10 years, this is something which we're looking at as an interim position for the next, say, 18, 24 months while we consider the local plan update. But I think we would all agree that implementing First Homes in Basingstoke and Deane to make sure that people can afford to get on the housing ladder more easily is something that we can hopefully all get behind. I'll pass over to Kate now, who may have some further comments to make, but very happy to take any comments, questions, considerations on the paper forward. Kate.
I think you've given a pretty comprehensive introduction, and just to sort of emphasise that within the appendix, we've set out the proposed areas where the local authority can have influence and shape the delivery and access to First Homes. It's an opportunity that arguably we should be seizing, and therefore the proposals are set out for comment from committee members to feed back to the portfolio holders.
Thank you very much, Kate. Okay, committee, if I just would like to take the paper in chunks, if we may. Okay, so the first one I want to take is from the start of the paper to the end of section 2. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on that? Councillor Vaux and then Councillor Mahoney.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions really for trying to make sure I'm understanding this paper correctly. In 2.6, there talks about sites outside settlement policy boundaries, which should primarily deliver First Homes, but can deliver a small proportion of other affordable tenures. So, if I've understood this correctly, then this could, in my view, jeopardise some of our strategic gaps, and those houses, settlements, would be all affordable stroke rented houses in that settlement. They would be First Homes and other types. Is that my understanding of this paragraph? That's the first question.
Matt will probably want to come in, but my understanding, if you take the policy of rural exception sites at the moment, all the legislation seeks to do is to implement exactly the same for First Homes. So it's no different in that sense to a normal exception site. So in that sense, a site which came forward in a strategic gap, as you say, for example, wouldn't be considered any differently to a site at the moment just because it was providing first homes. But I don't know if Matt's got any. Yeah, Matt's happy with that.
Okay.
I get good marks for that.
Sorry. So, but if we were doing that kind of development, it wouldn't be mixed. It would be all affordable first homes, whatever terminology you want to use. It wouldn't be sale and no, it would be all, which I think personally I would not be in favour of promoting. That's my personal view. Yeah.
Just very briefly, that the principle of a rural exception site is that it is all affordable housing. The First Homes proposal that's come through government, and one of the changes in the Housing and Planning Act 2019 was to add low-cost home ownership as a type of affordable housing. So in that sense, First Homes is a type of affordable housing to be considered alongside intermediate, shared ownership, social rent, affordable rent, etc.
Matt.
I think so. I think it's just worth pointing out that there is provision for within the government legislation for market homes on exception sites where they're required to support the viability of that development. But they should be a smaller part of the development.
Thank you.
That's really helpful clarification. Could I just have a second question? Is that okay, Chair? Do you want me to come back?
Yeah, we
That's
just go
fine.
through everybody else first if we can. Okay, I've got Councillor Mahoney who indicated to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I've become
Sorry,
Mahoney
Matt.
again. I think it was Mahoney last time as well. Thank you, Very grateful. That's all right.
I do beg your
I'll
pardon.
answer to anything. No worries. I've lost my question now. I'm actually quite excited about this. I think parts of this are absolutely brilliant, and the key thing from my perspective is the local eligibility criteria, because this is something that's very, very current in the villages. We have multiple generations that have grown up in villages, and with the ridiculous inflation of house prices, we're suddenly finding that our children are having to move away. So, again, lots of questions around that. But I guess the first one I'm going to outline is how do we keep it properly local? So we're all worried about building homes for London overspill when we really want to be building for our residents. But how do we actually then keep it down to the parish? I do notice you've given the first option to the parishes, but you're also going to get people sort of speculating on, buy for rent and all that sort of thing. The objective is keep it for our kids, is my thoughts.
I think, as is the case with all affordable housing, the eligibility criteria is challenging. And getting something that is right is really quite difficult. I mean, I know from my own ward, I have villages which are very distinct communities, which are represented by two separate parishes. So you have a village which is literally divided in half by a parish. So actually using the terminology of a parish in that context is quite unhelpful, because they could apply to live on one side of the village and not on the other, which is quite challenging. And also, one of the things I'm very conscious of as a councillor which no longer just has parishes is that parts of the urban area don't enjoy that same conurbation, and making sure that we have the same or similar criteria for people who live in an urban area is really important. If people have grown up in Brighton Hill, dare I say, they want to live in Brighton Hill. They don't necessarily want to live in Kempshire or Hatchwarren, lovely though those places may be. So in Appendix 1, which is page 39, we talk about various elements of the criteria and policy features around limits on income, which I think is really important to make sure we're targeting this support at people in most need, making sure that people have got the right funds as well, looking at the percentage discount, and that local connection criteria as well, making sure that people have been, and I'm just reading this one out, normal residents in the borough for the previous 6 months before their expression of interest in the scheme, or for a total of 3 out of the previous 5 years before their expression of interest. I think we do need to cater for people who are based in Basingstoke but have, for one reason or another, be it work, family commitments, availability of accommodation, have, dare I say, slipped over the border to Hart, Rushmore, Test Valley in the near interim, or even West Berkshire perhaps in the near interim. You know, we're not an island in that sense, but making sure that we do deliver that product for the people who need it locally is really important. Hopefully that half answers your question.
Yeah, for the time being, I've got more questions based around it, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mahaffey. I do apologise for getting your name round up. You know, I do apologise. Councillor Laura James, please.
Thank you. Picking up on that point, in relation to the start of the report, you talk about local connection or their employment status. Does it have to be one or the other? Could we not have both? Is my first question.
I think this is something which is, and Kate will correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's a feature of the current system is that it is one or the other, because you could theoretically have somebody who's a key worker in a school or in Basingstoke Hospital, for example, who doesn't live in Basingstoke at the moment. They might live in Hart, West Berkshire, Test Valley, and commutes in, but they do want to live in Basingstoke, and in that sense they do have a local connection by virtue of working here. So in that sense it is one or the other, but I'm happy to take views.
But what I was meaning by that is, you know, in the sense of a key worker, or when we talk about our employment, we would look at what would we want as a criteria in relation to employment. So we may want to give this discount to, or this possibility to, people that have a local connection and they are a key worker, and there are certain employments that we would want to look at encouraging. So is it teachers, is it nurses, is it care workers, bus drivers? You know, why could we not have both is my question. And picking up on the point that you just raised, Tristan, in relation to, do you want me to stop there and then? Yeah, okay.
Sorry. Yeah, it literally is one or the other. So you have this range of priorities around local connection. One is employment, or it is residence. So it you know, you only need to have one, and you've got that priority. And it's having, remember, this is a time limited priority. It's for saying of these properties, who do we want to give priority for the first number of weeks / months of sale, and that's what we through this policy it's enabling us to do, to actually determine that priority will go to these groups of people. In terms of key workers, the provision in relation to key workers is they don't have to adhere to the 6-month time period, so it's given that additional, it's almost like given an opportunity to recognise those strategic priorities that we have done from time to time, whether it's local connection through residents. With key workers, when we were framing this as a recommended policy position, we were very much guided by the consultation results that we undertook for the housing allocation scheme, which very much told us that our community didn't necessarily see or rank or rate certain sectors above others. If you were a key worker, you were a key worker. And that's specifically in relation to sort of, everyone talks about teachers and public sector, but actually we had a lot of feedback at the time to say there's lots of people working in the private sector. And that's why we've kept the definition very broad. Particularly if you think of COVID, those sorts of professions that were actually, you know, given much more prominence and recognition for the impact that they have on the economy and community. So it's where we can, taking the opportunity to say, yeah, that's important to us, and therefore we can give that priority in the scheme.
And picking up on the point that you said, Tristan, around the in the appendix around normal residents in the borough for previous 6 months, I can see that you're wanting a catch-all to be able to enable people that have slipped over the border, but doesn't that also enable that people that are working in London or worked in London and moving down to access this discount? And what I'm concerned about in the report, it makes reference to first come, first serve. I'll pick this up a bit later on in relation to the inequalities impact assessment, but I think I do think this is an issue, and I'm not comfortable with that at all. Really, I suppose. I can see why you might want it, because there are people that have maybe lived in the villages and are now moving out to the other side of the border. But it also means that there'll be people that are, living in other areas of the country, that this is an opportunity to settle here, and it really goes against local connection.
Councillor Robertson.
I'm not sure I agree on the basis of what's written in front of us. It's page 40, is the page that it's on. So in the example you say around somebody who, for example, has works in London, they would either have to be living in Basingstoke and have lived in Basingstoke for the past 6 months to go onto the register, or they would have had to have lived in Basingstoke for 3 out of the previous 5 years. And I think that is a local connection. So if you've got somebody who, has been to school, grown up here, been to school, been to college here, maybe taken a job in London and lived in a HMO with friends, for example, in London for a year, 18 months, I don't think that should preclude somebody from coming back home, as it were. And I think that's what it's intended to do. And I believe that's the same as what's in our affordable, the housing allocations policy for social rent as well. It's actually less for our social housing register. It's 2 years in that sense.
But in relation to those people that are working here and are living here and are on the register, what's the differential in relation to the status that we give to those against those people that have possibly moved away, or that are living and have never lived here but have just moved in because you can give examples of where there's Mrs. Smith's son who had to move up to London but there are also people that are moving down and have got lodgings or have rented a place for the last 6 months and are working here. And this is quite an interesting proposition to them. I just would like to discuss that with you a bit more to express my concerns, really.
Councillor Robertson.
Are there any other views around the committee table on that?
I have a whole list of questions. Councillor Vaux. Oh, sorry, I do beg your pardon.
Yeah, sorry, on that
one particular issue.
Where it's so at the moment it says normal residents in the borough, and I hate designing policy by committee because a camel is a horse designed by committee, but it says at the moment normal residents in the borough for the previous 6 months or for a total period out of 3 of the previous 5 years. What I'm hearing is no problem with the previous 3 out of 5 years, but potentially somebody moving here, having only stayed in Basingstoke for 6 months, that they're eligible to apply for this type of accommodation. Is there other views around the table on that particular point?
Councillor Mahaffey.
It's not a view. I just wanted to support the idea that I think 6 months is a very short period of time.
Do we have a view as to what?
Yeah, do people have a view on what is an appropriate point of time?
This is a discussion we've actually been having in our village. I'm not going to. I've written a few things that I think are qualifying statements here, but I'm not going to read them out. Could I ask that our parish council put a piece of paper to you, just in terms of what their thoughts are as a community?
Very happy for them too. I saw Councillor Carr was looking to interject.
Yeah, I had Councillor Carr down on my list. Councillor Carr.
Yeah, I think it's this 6 months thing is interesting. So if we do have someone who's gone up to London, friends of mine are looking to move back here, I don't want a situation where they have to come down, rent for 6 months, and then be eligible. Because I if you're saving for a deposit, you're then wasting 6 months on rent. So I think, I'm not sure that 6 months figure is necessarily the most helpful, and I think thought needs to go into that, on that basis alone.
I think there's okay. So from my point of view, I think the rule that is 3 out of the previous 5 years potentially, I think that covers people who've lived here, gone up to London for 18 months to see the big bright lights and enjoy a life with people their own age, dare I say. But as long as they were resident for 3 of the previous 5 years, they're entitled anyway. They don't need the 6 months because it's one or the other, not both. So I think that's helpful. I think what we're saying is it right that anybody, comes to Basingstoke and Dean and they've only got to be here for 6 months before applying for this type of product? There is a risk that if it's too restrictive, that frankly there won't be enough people to fill the place to apply for the properties overall. But as I say, I'm happy to take views. It might not be something that we solve tonight. It might be something that people give a view on tonight, on something that's more appropriate, and that we have representations from parish councils and other councillors. But
okay, Councillor Vaux.
On reflection, just listening to everybody, the employment for 16 hours a week is very good, isn't it? And the close family associations with the requirement to move to offer care is really, really good. The 3 out of 5 years is really, really good. The things I think that people are a bit nervous about is the 6 months. So I just wonder if there's a way of coupling that 6 months with work or with work that in the borough, because it doesn't say that. It just says 6 months.
I'll defer to Tom.
Thank you, Tristan. I think it's important to remember that 25% of all new affordable housing is going to be first homes. And what we don't want to do, as we just mentioned, is restrict it so much to the extent where we get to our 3-month period which we do have discretion or are able to give local priority. And then because it's too restrictive, we then move to a point where it's expanded to anyone in the country, and anyone who hasn't lived here for any period of time could then be coming in and taking the first homes within the borough. So it's trying to strike that balance between obviously making it wide enough so people can access it, but not making it too restrictive at the same time.
Can I add? Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
If it helps, the thinking behind this was that we have the allocation scheme for rented accommodation, which is I think we've maximised the controls and restrictions we can as far as we can, and that local connection in terms of residence for the housing allocation scheme is a 2-year residency qualification. The thinking behind this was, as Tom mentioned, this is around a sort of very fluid, much more fluid sort of sales, low-cost home ownership market, which tends to be very different to an inert waiting list, if you like, for social housing. And so therefore it was trying to give it a little bit more flexibility. Now, members may not feel comfortable with that. It's just about sort of understanding what the risks may be. It could also be that you have a starting position and then you review that. There's no reason why the criteria couldn't be reviewed and then changed and flexed depending on sort of what's coming out of it. I think the key is that, as Tom said, we don't want the risk of being so restrictive, particularly in some parish areas, that there are no eligible households, so therefore no local person will therefore get it. So it's about having that sort of pitch, but we can certainly take the comments away. And
there's a lot of people wanting to come back. I do want to come back to Laura James, but just before we do that, okay, is there any way we can give this a priority? Okay, we have 3. Well, there's 3 areas, and one being a key worker, one being, living in the borough for 3 out of the 5 years, and then can we have the 6 months after that?
Let's try and forget how we allocate social housing, because with social housing we can say this person number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 in that order should get this vacancy. What this is saying is which group of which cohort of your local communities would you want to almost have a certification of eligibility so they can go off and buy. It is very different in that sense. So when it comes to actually saying we'd rather this person had it than that, we're not able to do that because we can't dictate who the developer sells to apart from whether or someone meets a certain type of criteria.
I think there is a key difference here in that the whole way of this scheme operating is that fundamentally, from a purchaser's point of view, you go to a developer as a private person and say, I want to buy a house. And I want to buy a first home because I've got this certificate here that says I'm eligible. It's not a case of, dare I say, signing up to the social housing waiting list, waiting your turn, and then the council saying, we have a property available for you now. Next. It's a different type of it is a different type of product. So we possibly need to be careful about rankings in that sense because it doesn't operate the same way.
It was just an idea.
No,
okay.
It's a good idea.
I'd like to go. I know everyone's itching to jump in here. I do have a list of people. I want to go back to Laura James first, okay. Then Councillor Mahaffey, then Councillor Dillow, then Councillor Carruthers, then Councillor McCormack, and then back to Councillor Vaux. So we're going in that order, okay. So, Councillor.
I said about designing this by committee, Chairman.
Yeah. Well, there's just a lot of questions, and Councillor Watts is on the list now as well, so thank you. So if we go to Councillor Laura James, please.
Thank you. I understand that people have friends that are in London and they may want to move back, and this is quite an attractive proposition to them. But it's about, in relation to this, is about affordable housing, and this is part of our affordable housing allocation, And I think that we need to look at it in those terms. It's really important that we review it in those terms. And there will be people that are on our register, or those people in need who have been working and living in this borough that have a local connection, and we need to make it possible for them to access this. Now, I understand after 3 months it can be open to anybody else. Now we then need to that's the case, it'll happen. And so we don't need to worry about that. But in the first 3 months, we need to ensure that those that really should have an opportunity to access this should. This isn't a slush fund for people to be able to return home that, might like to do so. This is important that it's an affordable housing allocation. And so that we need to ensure that those in most need actually can access this. We need to do everything in our power to support those people, and as I said, I'll come on to that in relation to the Equalities Impact Assessment later. Thank you.
Thank you. And any reply there?
Only that I agree.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Mahaffey, please.
Thank you, Chair. What I'm hearing is that your concern over this 6 month clause is that you're not going to have enough applicants to actually fulfil the housing that's hopefully going to be built. My personal experience is I think you're going to be absolutely swamped with applicants. So my suggestion is, rather than have the 6 month criteria, just drop it all together. And if you're concerned about building and the flexibility to get more applicants, expand the 3 months priority window at the beginning. Would that not work? That's statutory, is it? That's okay. Well,
can we have that for me on record, please? If you press the microphone.
The 3 month window is statutory, so we can't change that. I think if there is what I wouldn't want to do is if we drop the 6 months entirely from this list, you would have to live in Basingstoke for 3 years before you applied to this. I don't think that would be reasonable either. I think it would be fair to say to people, I'm quite happy to change the 6 months and make that longer. Maybe in the first, I mentioned at the beginning, this is an interim statement in advance of the local plan, and we can flex it and we can change it. Maybe we say actually it's a year, and that potentially would ensure that people aren't just coming here then. If they have moved away, say they've dropped over the border to Hart for a job, or they've dropped over the border to West Berkshire for a job, or Test Valley, they can come back as long as they've got 3 of the previous 5 years in the borough. But actually somebody moving here after a year would be eligible. I think that might work as a suggestion, perhaps.
Can I also highlight that we're suggesting and moving forward on building up a low-cost home ownership register, So actually, we're almost having this debate on what we assume and what we think and what we expect. But actually, one of the other sort of key points in the report is that we will be bringing in resource to build up a first home, a low-cost home ownership register, which we will be able to actually, when we come to review and look at that, actually do that with the benefit of some quite, better data than we're working with at the moment in terms of, length of residence and that type of thing.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to jump back in there, Tristan? Or
only to say that in the interests of moving this forward, I'm very happy to change that to a year if that's what the committee want.
Okay. I think the answer is yes, but let's go on. I've got Councillor Konesko, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to make the point. I think I'm naturally inclined to be a bit more restrictive and move towards 1 year. However, I note the point you made at the start, Councillor Robinson, namely that this is new territory. Let's give it a go. Let's see what happens. Let's review it. I would be more relaxed to go with whatever it is, almost 6 months or a year, somewhere in between. If we can make perhaps a formal commitment to say we will review this after a year, we'll bring it back to EPH this time next year, take a look, see how it's working, and then see where we are. Because I completely understand the points that Councillor Laura James is making. I think the thing I struggle with, I just don't know who's right, and I don't think any of us do. But let's get a year's worth of data in. Let's see where we are. Let's formally agree to review it, and then we can make a decision then.
Very happy to change it to a year, as I mentioned. I think on bringing it back, very happy to bring it back. Members know I don't mind coming to committee. That's not a problem at all. What I would say is 2 issues. One, I think we need to time it appropriately with the local plan update. So we said this is a forerunner to get it in place before the local plan update. I think we need to find the most appropriate time, and dare I say that will be Councillor Bound and a conversation with Ruth Ormella as our head of planning to consider when the right time might be. It might be 18 months. And also Kate's point as well is if we agree this today, as EPH, this still won't happen for another few months. And I think it would be helpful to have, dare I say, a year's worth of sales data to go back and look at where we are. So actually, if we said we're going to bring it back a year to the day, we might only have 6 months of sales data, and that wouldn't, by the time that we've written the report and you've taken the time off at both ends. So very happy to bring it back, and that commitment from me as portfolio holder and as Kate from an officer side, we will bring it back. But
1 year from delivery.
Yeah, maybe 1 year from delivery.
Whichever's more relevant.
Yeah, or the local plan review.
That's all right. I'd be very comfortable with that. I'm not sure what other members of the committee think, though, so I'll leave the chair to perhaps sound them out.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dillo, please. I've been waiting patiently.
I'm just wondering how flexible the first-time buyer section is of the criteria. I'm just thinking specifically of maybe single-parent families. Would they be excluded if they'd been involved in a previous purchase? I'm just looking at the First Homes Allocations Plan. The criteria. Do they have to be a first-time buyer? So would a say like someone that's got divorced, a single parent that may have been involved in a previous house purchase, would they be excluded?
It's a national definition, and it's not something we have control over. So they have to be a first-time buyer, much as stamp duty is administered. Would be my guess, and it is a guess, but I'm seeing nods to my left. That if you, Matt, I'll defer to you, seeing as you've got something in writing. No. Yeah. Look at that. That was a good guess, wasn't it? A purchaser of a first home should be a first-time buyer as defined in paragraph 6 of Schedule 6ZA of the Finance Act 2003 for the purposes of stamp duty relief for first-time buyers. So it is pegged to stamp duty in that sense. So it is the legal definition of whether somebody is a first-time buyer or not, and we don't have discretion over that.
That's a shame, isn't it?
other products are available. In the sense that this governs the 25% of the 40%. There is still scope within the, there will be other intermediate products, and there may well be, shared ownership products come and go all the time. So, yeah.
Thank you, Kate. Councillor Carruthers, please.
Thank you. More comments than questions from me. First of all, as regards an increase from the 6 months to 1 year, I would support that. Secondly, there was talk earlier, I think it was Councillor James mentioned briefly about could we not do employment and resident of the borough. Just to say, I think we need to be a little bit careful in that work has changed over the last year and a half, and there's a lot of people now working remotely. I know a few people who their employment place has changed, that because they've closed an office and they're now supposedly based in an office much further away, even though they're working at home in Basingstoke and Dean. And I think we need to bear that in mind. Also, we talk about parish connection. Being a Tadley councillor, we can't build an awful lot of houses in Tadley because we're restricted. So how would it work for someone like us? I've got someone in Tadley and that we're building houses, say in Borghurst or in Silchester or in Pamberheath. Would they have to wait the 3 months, and then would they still be given some sort of priority, being localer than somebody coming from further afield? Would we take that into consideration?
So on your point, I think your point about working from home is really important. Actually, it's not something that I considered. So I think the importance of making sure it is living or working is really important. I think you in Tadley have a bigger issue than I mentioned at the start, but it is a similar issue. And if you've got a village cut in half by a parish boundary, it needs to have flex. And I think Tom was going to pick that up briefly.
Yeah. So in terms of parish delivery, as we kind of touched on earlier, we have the first 3 months where we're able to exercise our discretion. So what we've done for first homes to be delivered in parishes is the first 6 weeks of the 3 months. So the first half will be priority will be given to those who have a local connection to that specific parish. And then for the second 6 weeks, it will be open to the normal Basingstoke and Dean local connection requirements. And then that takes us to that 3 month period whereby it's open to everyone. That's when it will go. Yeah.
So a comment on that, as a rural councillor, could it be parish or adjoining parish? It could. Okay, it could be.
I think as chair, I would like to say it could be parish or adjoining parish. Okay, but also
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. But it also needs to be area specific, or it needs to cover the town as well, because all of the town wards don't have parishes. How would that be covered?
Well,
you're going to have to talk about
I think we need to.
I agree in principle. I think when I took on the portfolio, I asked that very question around the housing register. There are a number of reasons which I won't go into tonight because we'll be here until past midnight, why that needs some careful consideration. And I think that's something that can be picked up within the local plan update and subsequently. I think the challenge with, urban communities are particular communities, and we in Basingstoke do have very particular urban communities in, Kempshott, Buckskin, Brighton Hill, Southam, to name a few. So we do have very particular urban communities, but they aren't the same as parishes. So it does need a bit of thought to make sure that you have enough flex to allow people to apply for a home that is most appropriate to them. So I think on the point, coming back to this particular policy around first homes, I think for first homes delivered in parishes, it says for the first 6 weeks, priority will be given to those who have a local connection to that particular or adjoining parish, I think is where I'm seeing some nods. Councillor Bound.
I was keeping very quiet because I think it's driven very much about the homes conversation, but of course we shouldn't also forget we have some urban parishes. Just to add it into the mix, because we often have that conversation that parish is rural. Well, it isn't always.
Noted. Rook's down.
Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor McCormack, you've been waiting patiently. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, in terms of the normal residents previous 6 months, I'm pretty relaxed about that, to be honest. And that's normally the sort of time you'd be looking at finishing probationary period of the contract of employment and looking to make permanent settlements. I think that's quite a good fit. My question is, and it was alluded to by Councillor Hafley just now, how many people do you expect to benefit from this scheme in the borough?
The simple answer, Councillor McCormick, and it's a very honest one, is we don't know. The slightly longer answer is a local plan delivery target of 850 homes a year. 25% of that is 200, give or take. That's the answer. 200 people a year. Up to.
Supplementary?
Yeah, and just on that, and how many of those do you expect to be key workers? Looking at page 46 of the key worker priorities, that does seem to be quite a loose. There's been a loosening of key worker definitions. I mean, when I look at health and social care, yeah, obviously, education, childcare, yes, key public services, yes, transport, yes, border control. Well, we don't have any airports or seaports in the borough, so I'm not sure why they want to live in Basingstoke and drive several miles to their job. And those working in financial services, I mean, are bankers key workers? I mean, I'm not sure how our public would see that.
I actually agree with you, Councillor McCormick. I think the definition of key workers is not necessarily correct. However, it is the government definition which they have provided to us in that context. So, in that sense, I agree, actually. I don't think it's the most helpful definition. I have personal views around this. But yeah, I don't think it's the most helpful definition, but it is the government definition.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Watts, please.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the portfolio holder. I think the list of key workers is far too broad. I thought I read in the paper we had local scope of what our local definitions were, and that we were just using the key workers as stipulated in the COVID response. So I think we've got flexibility to make our own key workers, and I agree it's far too broad.
Okay, I'm being told we can change it, but I don't want to. I think this is something that we need to consider. And what I would say, as the paper evolves, it is part of a mix. It provides some latitude to ensure that those working in those professions have the opportunity to apply. And it is, and I think Kate's just pointed out to me the last point on here, which was added in by officers, is any other occupation not in the categories above which provides an essential service to the Basingstoke and Deane Borough or wider society to be demonstrated by the prospective purchaser and determined by the council. So there is a catch-all in there to make sure that this potential product can be picked up by others. And I think on your point, Councillor Watts or McCormick, around bankers being essential workers or key workers in the context of the local government definition, it says financial services, I think I would refer you to the other points of this policy which talk about a maximum earnings criteria. It talks about a maximum purchase price. So I think yes, there are some catch-alls in here which I think we might all not be 100% comfortable with, but I think in the main as the policy, with those other preclusions in place, it probably gets us to about the right place, would be my view.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Would it be fair to say that this is also something we could review after the year's worth of sales data and just in case definition is too broad or otherwise?
Yes, it's absolutely, I think when the paper comes back in a year from implementation, I think considering all of these various elements of the policy to see how it's worked, that's the purpose of an overview and scrutiny function, is to look at what policies we've implemented. Is it working? Is it not working? So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, Councillor Canescu, please.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions relating to the criteria in Appendix 1, if I may. You've already touched on one, actually, Councillor Robinson, around the maximum annual income. And it's stated there as being 80,000 a year, and we've got the option to lower it. From the admittedly basic desktop research I've done, the average salary in Basingstoke seems to be somewhere between about 30 and 35,000 a year. So a household with two working adults would, on average, then have somewhere between 65 and 70,000 a year. So the 80,000 limit to me seemed quite high. And I'd be interested just to sort of get your thoughts on your thinking as to why you set it at 80,000 rather than a bit lower. And similarly as well, the next criterion is around the percentage discount, and the standard is 30%, which is what we're proposing to adopt. But we have the option of increasing that to 40 or 50%. And I appreciate that there's some extra work involved in terms of evidencing that. But given we live in a very expensive part of the country, probably one of the most expensive parts of the country, we look at the surrounding area, could we not make a case for increasing that discount beyond 30% to 40 or even 50?
So I think there's a couple of points there. The £80,000 is outlined by government. You're right in that we can change it. However, it's not as simple as that. And this is the case for both the income definition and the percentage, in that other elements of the policy we can literally decide amongst ourselves. Those are two elements of the policy where if we want to change, we have to present evidence to a government inspector to prove that that is a sustainable position. Now, taking the view that we might have a differing view from those positions, fine, but I think I do come back to the point that I said at the beginning, in that this is an interim policy paper, to get this in place to make sure our residents can benefit from it as soon as possible, and then we can use some of the data that comes through the local plan review. And in particular, Councillor Bound and I recently had a presentation from the planning team and some consultants around the strategic housing market availability assessment, I think. Yes, housing market assessment, which showed some of the information around averaging earnings, etc., in Basingstoke and Deane, which I think was really helpful. I take your point about the overall earnings criteria, but I would highlight that the earnings criteria on the social housing register is £50,000 a year. I know a number of us discussed that at length at committee previously. I think if you take the £80,000 and multiply that by 4, which would be your 4 times salary, you get to 320. The maximum purchase price of a property on this is 250. So I think there are safeguards in other areas. It is a household income. I think, happy to have the conversation, but certainly this is an interim position. I think on the amounts and the discount, I think Tom and Matt would like to come in as well.
I was going to actually say exactly what you said, Tristan, about that example of a couple both on £40,000 a year. Their mortgage is going to be 320 to 350,000, and this scheme probably isn't really going to be suitable for that cohort, really. And indeed, it is about, as we said before, trying to widen it as much as possible Matt, think you were going to say?
I'd just say with the percentage discount, it was something we did have looked at through the housing market assessment, and the consultant did come to the view that 30% did provide a sufficiently large discount to make a product which was useful and filled a gap in the market. I think procedurally, if we wanted to change that 30% to 40%, probably the local plan update is a better place to look to do that, because as Councillor Robinson alluded to, the evidence that needs to sit behind it.
I think when the local plan update comes out, I think those SMART figures will be available to members anyway. But it did lead us, and yes, we live in an expensive part of the country. However, in the context of some of our near neighbours, and I'm thinking of Winchester, Hart, East Hampshire, for example, we are not the most unaffordable, actually, and that's not to belittle the issue, but it was the view when we asked, the question externally as well as internally amongst our own skill set of officers, is that 30% discount was probably the most appropriate option, and to do anything different would require a very robust evidence base that we are not sure at this time can be demonstrated. However, it may be able to be demonstrated through the local plan update.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add, I think that's that stuff, isn't it? I agree absolutely with implementing the interim policy, and then we'll have that evidence after 12 months, and then we can absolutely put that in the local plan update process.
Great. Wonderful. If it is very quick, because I've got other people here who are itching to get in.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely get your arguments, and I do fully understand that there is a strong logic to just getting it done, getting it out there, getting the data, and then changing it. I guess my concern is that the whole intention of this is to help those who need the most help. And I'm concerned that if we start off too high, this scheme gets branded in people's perceptions as something that actually is too broad and doesn't help those who need it most. And that's my concern with your response. So let's give it a year and see what happens, because in that year we could end up shooting ourselves in the foot, and I'll leave it there.
I think that's one of the good things in the way that the policy is set up, actually, in that it's not a iterative register. Nobody will be disenfranchised because of this. It gives more people an opportunity. So it's not like the social housing register where you're saying to somebody, actually, you can't have this because you don't meet X, Y, and Z. It's saying to all of these people, whether they have £50,000 joint income, you've got two people earning £25,000 a year, say, or you've got two people earning £80,000 a year, one is worth no more than the other. They can both go to a developer of said housing site and say, I qualify for a first home, I would like that first home. So it's not playing one off against the other, and I think that's quite helpful in this.
But you are playing one off against the other in the sense there's a finite supply of housing, and therefore if you've got two people competing for one house, one with a household income of 80,000, one with a household income of 50,000, then you would argue that perhaps the one with the 50,000 should be given priority, given the one with the 80,000 could afford to potentially buy in the open market.
We would not be assigning any priority to that resident. We would simply be saying, as the council, that resident has the ability to use a first home product. Ultimately, it is for the individual purchasing a house to say that they can afford this house or not.
But they're still competing for two people competing for one house.
But in reality, I suppose what we're saying here is that under the first homes area, what we're doing is we're issuing people with almost like a mortgage certificate, but it's a certificate which they take on to the builder. Okay, so it's then down to the resident and the builder to actually decide which house they can afford and take on board. And so I think it's less of a prioritisation, and it's more just a vehicle to enable people to get onto the housing ladder. Unless, of course, you wish to correct me, Councillor Robinson. Okay. So thank you for that. I've got Councillor Carr, then Councillor James, then Councillor Watts, and then Councillor Vaux. Councillor Dillo and Councillor Mahaffey.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Observations. I think we need to. I agree with the position regarding adjoining parishes, but I think we need to consider the fact that obviously the AONB binational agreement is not within the first home proposal. But obviously, a lot of my parishes in Evangard don't actually border a parish that isn't in the AONB. So I wonder whether we need to consider adjoining parishes that adjoin parishes within the Basingstoke part of the AONB. So I'm thinking if you're in East Woody and that's your local connection, you might perhaps border Kingsclear on the other side of the AONB or parts of Burclere, etc. So that's an observation I think we should consider. 3 months is quite a short period of time, and I think therefore there needs to be a lot of work by the housing team to advertise this and make sure that parishes are advertising this, because otherwise people will say, well, I didn't know that had happened, it's too late. So I think a lot of work and thinking needs to go into how that happens in practice. There's reference in paragraph 2.4 about the council's key role in monitoring that these discounts are retained in perpetuity. I'd be interested in an explanation from officers about how that will actually be achieved. Are we going to have a note on a file about every house sold? Are we monitoring every resale? How that works in practice? And then I suppose my only final point relates to the appendices when we talk about local connections and moving to provide care. I think in reference to that conversation about not being too restrictive, I think that and requirement to receive care is probably an unnecessary and helpful restriction. Obviously, people who give care, it's a wonderful thing to do. And perhaps that should be covered in a rephrasing of the key worker policy. But my thinking is, if you have parents who are, say, in their 50s, who aren't actually unwell or in need of care, but you want to live in your borough, in your village, the implication of this and a requirement to move seems to be that those people would be excluded. So they might have the close family connection, but because they can't demonstrate the need to move to care, they would then struggle to qualify. And so those are my observations.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. On the AONB point, that's only for rural exception sites, but I'll defer to Matt to explain in more.
Sorry, the reference in paragraph 2.6 about not being the AONB relates to the first home succession site policy. So if affordable housing is required on a site in a parish within the AONB, there's still an expectation that 25% of that affordable housing should be first homes.
So that's potentially something positive, which is good. On the advertising, I completely agree. I think that's where the creation of a low-cost home ownership register is really important. We already have the affordable housing register at the moment, which has a dot mailer, where emails go round, people can log in, check which products are available. That regular note goes round to all people on the list to show them what properties are available, and the importance of pursuing that for this as well. So particularly when local plan sites come online, when a development of 200 homes gets released, 50 of those will be first homes, and putting that out to people on that list to say, look, this is available, do apply. I think that's really important to getting that advertising right. Absolutely. On the resale, it is noted as a restriction on the title with Land Registry. So in that sense, that product has to be used for another person pursuing first homes, and that if it were tried to be sold outside of that would be picked up in the legal checks, because it is a restriction on the title for that property. On the care point, it's close family associations within the borough and a requirement to move to the borough. However, if they already lived in the borough, they'd be eligible anyway. It's only those who've moved outside. So if you've moved outside the borough and you need to come back to give care, then that provides for it. If you're already in the borough, then you don't need that care restriction because you're eligible anyway. So hopefully that covers that. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Robinson. If it's just a very brief.
my reference back to the title was as a fail safe. So if nothing else trips, then that. But we will the team will have a register of what has been sold as a first home product, because those people would have come through to have that certificate, and then the developer will check their certification with the council team to make sure they qualify. So the team would be notified at that point that that house has been sold, and that's where, dare I say, Kate will say, some additional resourcing needs to be provided. Which we've asked for and we've got, to make sure that we can have that register of properties which are first homes within the borough.
I mean, it's a new area of activity. You know, our involvement in monitoring and having this much control over the intermediate products that come out of the affordable housing loot, if you like, are much less than we're looking forward to have now. So yes, there are lots of practical things that we've thought. You know, where does the 3 months start? Where does the 3 months end? You know, particularly in a development process, where are all of these practical things? And a lot of it will be in, you know, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating when we actually get to start doing this and building up the processes. So that it is new. This is nothing off the shelf that we're lifting.
Thank you very much, Kate. Okay, so Councillor Laura James, please.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions in relation to 2.9. It's been talked about tonight about the 30%. Where does the additional cost of the affordable housing, how is that met? So they're saying it's going to be more costly to deliver the 30%. Who meets that additional cost?
Sorry, I'm not following. Laura, could you say that again?
Well, 2.9. If you look at 2.19. So if there's a price cap of 250, and then we're saying that we're going to increase that to 30%, who meets that additional cost in making it more affordable? Is it that it's just the product is more affordable, or what happens about giving them an additional discount, or is it that the developer has to meet that?
Yeah, ultimately the developer has to meet that. So the developer would have to make a greater discount to get below the price cap. So that's a conversation between the developer and, dare I say, their landowner.
And do we know that they would do that? Have we had those discussions with them in relation to Basingstoke and Dean? So, are they like? Why would they do that? I suppose is a question. I want to go on to another question.
Because they're mandated to do so through government policy, so they're held to. I mean, within broad definitions, our strategic housing mix. So they have to provide a mix of homes. They can't just provide 1 and 2 bedroom affordable houses. They've got to provide a mix. And they are bound to provide first homes, and they are bound to provide a mix of the affordable as well as the private. So they are bound to by planning law in that sense.
And thank you very much. Is it just one more quick question?
There's 2 questions, and if quickly, then you will have to come back to me.
Okay, thank you.
Just to understand it, this is going to be implemented sooner than the changes to the local plan. How can we do that in that this is a change to the local plan? How can we implement something that, this affordable housing policy doesn't relate to our existing? Are we challengeable on that in relation to a developer or?
So it's a national piece of legislation that's come through. Just as a government changes its mind every now and again and decides it wants to change the law to stop something happening or to make it happen, and they've changed the law in this sense to say that developers must provide first homes from a particular date. I believe the date for applications which have not gone through the pre-app process is 24th of December, 28th of December, apologies. they have to provide them from that point, and that's something which the government has set out in legislation, which is then backed up in the NPPF and NPPG to do that. So it's ministerial law rather than, and the discretion that we have as a council, we have some discretion, as we've spoken about tonight, on how we allocate that resource, but the principle of providing first homes is imposed through national legislation.
Is it different to other changes that we see, environmental changes or the climate change? Because we've always said that we can't do it until there's a change of a local plan. Why do we have to do this and not other things that we've always been told you can't do that until the local plan changes?
Because of the strength the government put behind this piece of legislation. Is the short answer. I mean, that they are putting a similar level of weight behind the Environment Bill, which is due to become the Environment Act. So when they do that, they will mandate 10% biodiversity net gain on all sites. There won't be a local plan update required to implement that. That will just happen at the point that the Act's passed. It's the same in that sense, but the short, swift answer is the government's been very clear on this, that it wants it to happen and it doesn't want to wait. It wants it to happen now.
Thank you very much.
This is
Councillor
last
Joe,
one. I'll come back then.
Yeah, I'll come back to you because you've had 4 questions there in a very short space of time. Councillor Watts, please.
Thank you. I was going to have a question, but you answered Councillor James's question. You make me think even more, basically, which is not good. So the government are forcing developers to give discounts of 30%. So it's not government grants, it's forcing the developers. So the developers will want to mitigate those losses by increasing 4 or 5 bedroom houses on their sites. Is that my interpretation? Are they just going to take a hit as well as the reduced percentage of affordable homes on the site and the intermediates as well?
If you can please keep your answer concise, that would be really appreciated.
I need to be slightly careful, Councillor Watts, in relation to my register of interests, as you'll appreciate. I think... No. That's all right, cheap point. I think the answer that I would... No, I'll defer to Councillor Bound.
I think there's a reality, isn't there, that I'm sure this committee is well aware of, that when we look at anything that potentially has an impact on viability and land values, that of course there will always be some issues about where that leaks out, what the impact of it is. It's an important point that's worth considering when something happens in an interim way, like this does as far as national legislation, before we go through a local plan update process. But it's also something for us to be acutely aware of, because of course all sorts of new policies that we might have in the local plan update will have an impact on viability and costs and implications. So it's a very valid question, but it's one of many things that will always be considered, and absolutely who carries it, what happens with the negotiations around that, is that a developer, is that land value, does that enter into all of those things that this committee will be acutely aware of, as far as suddenly saying, there's an issue about viability on a particular site and a particular development. We know all of those things are true.
Thank you, Councillor Bound. Okay, supplementary, Councillor Watts?
Yeah, we say we don't know how many people are going to be affected by this scheme. Surely we have some data on how many houses or homes we've been built under 250,000 in the last few years. Obviously, predominantly going to be 1-2 bedroom homes. So we must have some data around that. And how is it actually going to affect people on the housing register? Because the way I see it is, you're still going to need £175,000 mortgage. Is a couple going to be earning £50,000? The way I see it, it's not going to make hardly any impact on our housing register. It's going to affect middle class kids like my kids, with reasonably well off parents that can afford to give them money to get onto this. It's not going to address the housing needs of the of the borough, the way I see it, I think it's not the way I would address the housing needs in this country. That's my own opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll pass to Tom.
Just in response to your question about data, I just thought to put it out there, we've got roughly 1,500 people on our current Help to Buy register for the Basingstoke area who have a registered interest in. Yes, it's at the moment shared ownership schemes, but that gives us an indication of the kind of level of demand around the area. We've also got 1,000 people on our Your Home emailer that Tristan referred to earlier, and there's probably going to be quite a lot of crossover between those two. In response to the housing register, I suppose, yeah, we've got the income cap of £50,000 for the register, and if a couple or a single person is earning £30,000 a year, they could get a mortgage of around £120,000 to £150,000. So there is the potential for it to meet a small portion of the people on the register. And my final point, just around your earlier question, me and Matt were just talking earlier about the where the difference is made from. The developer's overall 40% requirement hasn't changed, so there's still 40% affordable housing provided on the sites. It's just not being provided by way of shared ownership or affordable rent. We're just getting 25% chunk of first home, so it's not going to make difference.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, you've got 80% market rent, and you're going to have 70%, 30% discounts. So the developers are going to be taking more losses on the affordability element. So they want to get them clawing the money back on the other side through more 4 or 5 bedroom properties, 3 bedroom properties. So it's not going to address the housing needs of the borough.
So I think it's just worth saying that one of the key requirements of the PPG in terms of us setting our first homes position is to make sure that the cost of our requirement with first homes is no more than the cost of our adopted local plan policy. So there shouldn't be any additional costs to the developer.
Thank you, Matt. Hold on, Councillor Watts. I think is there some...
Carry on.
Okay. Councillor Watts.
On my first point of how many homes were under £250,000 built in this borough in the last couple of years. So it's fundamental to this whole paper, how many people in the borough it's going to affect. If we haven't got that data, we can't pluck 200 out of the air, can we? If we don't know that data.
So the policy which the government wants us to implement is the policy the government wants us to implement. We don't have discretion on that. I don't believe we have sales figures at the moment for how many properties have been sold over a period of time over and above a certain value, and that's not to say that that's a reliable guide for the future. I think the key with this, as we said at the beginning, is to get a policy implemented and then to consider the impact of that through the local plan update once we've got some additional evidence on how that's been taken up amongst the population.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Dirrow, please.
I just want some clarification over the resale. So going forward, the discount has to stay in perpetuity, doesn't it? So it's a double-edged sword in a way, because obviously if someone wants to then go on, buy a house with a partner or on their own, if they've got a really good job, the buyers are going to be a small niche, aren't they? They're only going to be first home buyers. So would that be a little bit of a disincentive to go into a first home? Do you see what I mean? It seems to constrict who is buying your house, so you can then move on up the ladder.
Potentially, yes. However, I would say that the evidence borne out by shared ownership, which in this case is actually, you could argue, no different, because when you go for shared ownership, you only own 80% of your house, for example, and that does allow people to move on and up the ladder still. And I think, you know, it's not for us there, you know, it's not for me to speculate on what the government considered or didn't consider when they do this, but I'm sure they did consider that, because why wouldn't they? But I think if you take the principle of once you've got somebody on the housing ladder, they have an asset, and then it is easier for them to move on, and the principle of people, there always being first-time buyers who need to get onto the ladder, in the context of a growing population, is probably one that will stand the test of time. But that's, you know, that's a matter for the national legislation, dare I say.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mahaffey, please.
Thank you, Chair. 1 point and 2 questions. One of my questions was one that wasn't answered earlier. You mentioned a 6-week window for parish council, for parishes. Just want to point out a lot of the smaller parishes don't actually meet every 6 weeks. Some of them don't even meet every quarter. So going back to this advertising thing, it's great that we've got a register, but there is a big advertising thing to be overcome there. My question that wasn't answered earlier, and I've only just realised it wasn't answered earlier, was the question about how we keep this out of the buy to rent market. And I'll give him an example of, I've got a 15-year-old daughter now. In 3 years' time, I'm hoping she's going to go away to university. That then gives me a 3-year window that I can grab one of these houses, call her back, she qualifies for the criteria, put her name on the title deed, buy the house at a discount, send her away to university again, and then let it out. How do we stop that? Question number 1. And question number 2 is, it's been largely covered now by previous questions, but this idea of, I'm delighted that the perpetuity question will be addressed by the register, but equally I'm still uncertain about how we pass on the discounts, because I can understand how we can enforce it on developers, but how it then becomes market value, it then becomes owned by an individual. How can we say to that individual that you must sell it at a 30% discount to the market value, given that they could go and chat to the local estate agent and say chuck it up on the market for 30% above market rate, and then we'll drop it down again.
So on the advertising, I agree, and it might be the case that through the low cost home ownership register that actually the parish clerks are included on that register. That would seem to me it wouldn't be much work to add. What we've got, how many parish councils have we got? 30, 40? Yeah, 30 something. Add 30 something parish clerks to the register so they get those notifications. That's probably a very easy thing to do. So that's easy. In the national legislation, which has been passed to me by my friends, it said we are clear that first homes are intended to be used as a person's sole or primary residence and should not be used for investment or commercial gain. So that's covered for. It isn't because that will be set out by the mortgage company as well on a first home. So if you take a mortgage on your first home, it will say for occupation only by the intended, and if you don't, then there are other penalties around that. So that, I think, covers that. So it is very clearly not for buy-to-let, and quite rightly so. How can it be passed on? As I say, that is a restriction on the title with Land Registry, which says, that's a legal agreement, a bit like a 106, I guess you'd have with a developer that says this must be like this. And again, it would be, I imagine, down to a reasonable person to say, well, yes, your mate who's an estate agent might have valued this at £500,000, but let's be realistic, it's actually only 400, or whatever. So I think that's the key there, unless Tom's got anything to add.
Yeah, just to say that the land registry restriction would restrict the percentage. So what would happen is, upon resale, the owner would have to instruct a RICS surveyor, registered surveyor, to value the property to make sure it's not, as you say, an estate agent coming around and helping a mate out. So that's how that will work in the resale process.
Thank you, Councillor Mahaffey. I'd also like to note that your intention to provide a house, for your daughter has been noted.
Who's Councillor Mahaffey? My name's Mahoney.
Okay, I've got Councillor Laura James, and then I've got Councillor Konechka. Councillor James.
Thank you. So mine is about the equalities impact assessment. So you're saying that we've got to deliver 200 units in relation to the percentage. That would be the requirement. We're told tonight that there's very few people, a small proportion was the word, of people on the register that could afford this product. So what I see is that this is a cut effectively in affordable housing. You're saying that this isn't changing the housing allocation policy, but it is, because if we have got to deliver 200 in this percentage area to meet the needs of this housing register, we're clearly not going to get those from the register. So they're going to be people that aren't in housing need as defined in our policy in the housing strategy. So what I want to know is, what can we do for that very small proportion of people, considering that they'll be up against people, like it was said, with greater income, and market forces is the reality. You turn up and you're earning £80,000, the developer is more likely to be attracted to that. And if you're working for the financial sector and they're one of the key workers, they're going to know what to do. They're going to know how to play the game. What are we going to do? And it doesn't really address this in this equalities impact assessment, to help that small group of people to ensure that they are going to get a bite at the cherry, because it's going to be first come, first serve. What can we do to support those people to enable them to have that opportunity?
Yeah, have a look at when we're looking at this in the round of this new policy governs what must be delivered within that 40% parcel. So at the moment we have a 70-30 split, and this is saying that the first 25% must be first homes, and the rest is then allocated according to policy. So in that scenario, you're still talking about that parcel of what intermediate and first homes being almost like the one and the same, really, in the sense. So I'm not sure where this sort of trade-off with people on the housing register is, because the remaining 75% will be still allocated according to policy.
But what you're saying is that in relation to the intermediate model, there's 1,500 people that are interested in that. And I assume, I'd quite like to, and I think we should do a bit of work on that, is to understand how many of those are on the register or meet housing need as defined. So what I'm concerned at is we've only got a very small percentage of people that would meet this criteria, will be able to afford this product on the register. What can we do to support them?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're talking about people who are on the housing register are actually applying for social rented accommodation or affordable rented accommodation. Some of them may be eligible to buy or may be able to afford to buy, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're being disenfranchised by this new policy. As I said, I'm not sure I sort of follow that same argument. In the sense that we still have our policies in terms of what the rented accommodation should look like in terms of delivery, and we have an allocation policy, housing allocations policy to ration that. This is just simply a different set of processes and criteria for a proportion of what was previously the intermediate.
But in relation to the equalities impact assessment, there will be people that are more vulnerable or will need more support. What is it that we can do to ensure that when they apply, they get because it is first come, first serve, how can we equip them that we actually ensure that that small proportion of people in housing need on the register who would like to do this and have got the income to do this, how can we ensure that they are successful? What are we going to do in relation to equalities to ensure that they achieve this?
I think the short answer, Councillor James, is they have the same opportunity, as everybody on the register through the advertising, which I think has been well. No, we need to get that right. Absolutely, they have the same opportunity to put an offer in on a new property as everybody else on this register. They have the same eligibility criteria in that, we've talked tonight about this being a virtual certificate to say that you're eligible for a first home product. They have that same.
It's not what equality's impact is about. There are people that are more vulnerable and need more support, and what are we going to do? Is you're assuming that they have all of those skills. We're saying that people that are disadvantaged for whatever reason are in housing need, they're on our register. There are people that are working in the financial sector are going to go along with who are earning £80,000. What are we going to do to ensure that those people who are the most vulnerable, who possibly, and they're on our register in housing, what are we going to do to ensure that they get a really good opportunity and that we get them off the register?
I don't think this policy or the equalities impact assessment is setting out to say that those most vulnerable will be the ones at the front of the queue in that sense. I mean, there's certainly the issues that we've picked up on around making sure that we advertise and making sure that we've got the support and advice available to people who want to pursue low-cost home ownership. But in terms of the level playing field and the equality of opportunity, I think that's where it starts, rather than sort of saying because some people may be more vulnerable than others, then we get into sort of almost having a ranking, if you like. So it's about having the support in place to ensure that those who may meet one of the protected characteristics are not disadvantaged.
Again, I'm just going back to the point that we've got a very small proportion of people on the housing register in housing need. And if this is part of the affordable housing allocation, we should be doing more, or doing as much as we can to ensure that those people are successful in relation to this policy. Leave it.
Yeah, I think the comment, Councillor James, is noted and heard in that we need to make sure that through our low-cost home ownership register, that those people who qualify have the appropriate support from the housing team, which they do. In the last couple of years, COVID notwithstanding, we've held a number of low-cost home ownership events. The housing team are available to provide that advice to people on housing opportunities which are most appropriate to them. And it may be that it is a first home that is most appropriate to them, but often, you mentioned the case of very vulnerable residents. It may be that actually this isn't the right product for them. It may be that there are alternatives in the form of a socially rented and affordable rented property, which may be more appropriate to them. And that's where we're very lucky that we have a team who do provide that advice and that support to individuals.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Canesco and then Councillor Vaux.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Dillow's question got me thinking, which is a bit worrying. Yeah, because I think my brain has crashed. But this idea of this 30% in perpetuity. So we have a house that's initially sold for 250, so it's at the maximum level, but over time it increases, and say it's now worth 300,000. Do all of the other criteria, such as in terms of income, for example, do they still apply when the sale's made? Because if that's the case, there's going to be a smaller pool of people who are going to be able to afford to take out a mortgage for that higher price. So are we causing a problem? And I appreciate this isn't your policy, so I'm not blaming you. I'm genuinely asking the question. Are we ending up in a situation where as the price of a house increases, the pool of people who can afford to buy it, given it's deliberately aimed for people, the less affluent, first-time buyers, are less able to purchase it, and you end up with people who are unable to sell a property because there's no one to sell it to?
Yes. Is the very honest answer, Councillor. Fiscal drag has a significant impact on this policy, and the understanding is that the government will review, as it is a government piece of legislation, the government will review the overall limits, if you like, because the key one, as you say, is the property value. Because as you say, through the passage of time, property values will be increased. And I think perhaps it's something that, government need to consider, is that they peg the 250,000 to the increase in RPI or CPI or property values, or that they find some clever method together with RICS to make sure that that value increases, because otherwise, as you say, I think the government's aim, and I understand why, although it does raise issues, has been to get the policy launched. But I think you're absolutely right that in a year, 18 months' time, once people have started, resale is not going to be an issue on these properties for 2 years, arguably, because nobody's going to have bought one until a year's time, never mind sold one. But you're absolutely right that in the fullness of time that will become a problem, and that's something that government need to consider.
Can I just say, so yeah, if I'm thinking about buying it, I should know, I would want to know that up front, because I could end up with a house in 2 years' time which has a very small pool of potential buyers, and I'll come back to the council, I'll come back to you and say, we sold me this house that now I can't myself sell. So I take your point. Yes, the government needs to review it, but perhaps can we be a bit more forceful in we will mention this to them if we think it's a genuine. I could be overstating this. I could be wrong, but if we do believe this is an issue, should we not be doing something about it?
I think your point is actually really well made, and I think it's one of the difficulties aren't thinking about other questions about the number of properties, because there is a reality about the price points that we have for properties in our specific area and the limits that are built into the national policy. I think when I looked on Rightmove, which is always a very dangerous thing to do, about what properties were on the market at one fixed point in time a couple of months ago that would fit the policy, I think I came up with 2 that were on the open market. So that's a reality about why the answering the question about numbers is really difficult, because I think it will significantly change the types of houses that are built, because they have a duty to fulfil the criteria as far as the policy is concerned. But absolutely, I think it's one of those things that we must have a real eye to when we start reviewing the policy, because price points and where our property market is becomes crucial. We are right in that sweet point that makes it really difficult.
Thank you, Councillor Bound. Okay, and finally, and I do apologise, Councillor Vaux. Councillor Vaux.
Thank you, Chair. Sitting too meekly, I think. Just to sort of take us back, don't all groan, to the criteria. I think I support the 1 year, and the reason that I support it is that you've got that lovely long list of key workers who don't need to qualify for that 1 year. So for people that we need to bring into the borough for those work areas, and they're quite eclectic, and you can appeal to something that the borough might feel is important, they can get they immediately qualified. So for me, that gives that safety net, and I think it can stop anybody speculatively coming for 6 months to try and benefit. I think that's really good. My question is about the tenure mix, which is sort of paragraphs 211 to 217. And my particular interest in the social rented bit. So 212 and 213, I think I've understood that our policy at the moment just says 70% rented and 30% intermediate, but does not specify how much of the rented is affordable and how much is social. Right. And then we would be moving to 25% first homes, 53% rented and 22% intermediate. Fine. So intermediate being shared ownership, that kind of stuff. Right. Then it says in 217 that these two statements and the above can be aligned if the value gap is met by delivering social rented accommodation instead of affordable rented accommodation, as these are both rented products. So am I to take from that our expectation would be that the 53% rented in that mix would be social rented?
That would absolutely be the team's starting point. As always, these things are a matter of conversation between the team and developer, and viability. But yes, absolutely, our position as a council is that it is more profitable, potentially, on the evidence that has been given to Parliament through the First Homes process, it is potentially more profitable to provide a first home than it is to provide an affordable home, be that rented or social rented. So if they're being given an amount with one hand, then that should come in another format. And our view very strongly when we saw this is that if that is the case, and this will be borne out ultimately by viability assessments and conversations, but if that is the case, then absolutely we want to see a higher proportion of social rent in the rented products rather than affordable rent.
Yeah, so can I absolutely say that would be wonderful news as far as I'm concerned? Because, I mean, as I've said on in frequent occasions, I'm really concerned about the diminution of our social rented sector, because there has been a government push to have more affordable rented. So I think, whilst I agree there's a lot positively to be said about the First Homes approach, but if it also enables us to increase our social rented sector, then I think that's a fantastic byproduct. Thank you.
I agree, and one of the things that I actually would have preferred is when the government did this policy, I think they should have made that clear, actually. I think they should have said, I think they actually missed a trick. I think they should have said, actually, we're saying you need to deliver this, which is potentially a more lucrative product, therefore we want this. And actually, I think that would have been better. I think if they'd, at the moment we are in a situation where the only affordable housing tenure where the provision is set down in law is first homes. There is no setting out in law to provide social rent, affordable rent, shared ownership, etc. None of that is set out in law. The only bit that's set out is first homes, and I think they missed an opportunity there.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Are there any more questions? Just to open it up. Any more questions at all? No? Okay. Have you got enough comments?
Thank you, Chairman. I think the key change in the policy is around the 6 months to a year on the eligibility criteria, which we've got the adjoining parish point as well, which I think has been well heard, and the 1 year review from implementation of this policy and picking up various bits of the detail through the local plan update to make sure that we have a policy which provides the most appropriate solution for our residents.
And then coming back.
And on the key workers, it currently says those working in utilities, communication and financial services, and unless anybody's got any objection, I intend to delete the last two words.
Can we get it on the record, please?
I object to that change on the basis that you've already got an income threshold as a criteria. I think you answered that question really well for me when it was asked, and so I think it's not going to be your big bankers, it's going to be your tellers, your clerks, and we need them.
Noted.
Thank you. And also the fact that you will bring this back to EPH on the review. Okay, all right. Any more questions, councillors, before we reset the table? No, I'm pleased you've got enough comments there. Okay, team. Thank you very much for coming through. You're always welcome. Okay, and then we'll move on. So we can reset everything for the item number 7, the transport strategy update. That'd be great. Which will be Mark Lambert. Do members need a 5-minute comfort break, or do we crack on? Okay, we'll just crack on. Okay, committee, thank you very much. Okay, so I want to hand over to Councillor Simon Bound to introduce the paper, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I won't keep you very long in my intro. Really, it's a very straightforward paper to give you a high-level summary of where we are on all of those work streams, which I know this committee has talked about, and it feels like a bit more of just an annual summary to give you an update. and I'm sure Mark will ably be able to deal with any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Would you like to just quickly kick off, and then we'll do questions?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Bound. Not much to add, to be honest. As Councillor Bound said, it's an update paper. There's a lot of work going on in the background. We're working really closely with Hampshire County Council as a highway authority. I think the paper really summarises where we're up to, but more than happy to pick up on any queries that the committee have got. Just a couple of things to draw to your attention in the paper. Perhaps 3.9, when it talks about the mass rapid transit. There's a significant amount of work going on in that respect. I want to kind of make the point that the mass rapid transit is a bus-based system. Hampshire have recently been required to prepare what's called a bus service improvement plan, which is a requirement of all the transport authorities in the country. They recently submitted their bus service improvement plan to the government, and it outlines aspirations for bus services by area in the county. And for us, that recognises some improvements in terms of bus infrastructure, so bus lanes, dedicated demand management techniques to get buses to the front of the queues more quickly. And the other point I wanted to refer to is the bullet points under 3.15 in terms of the local cycling or walking infrastructure plan. I know some councillors were involved in the workshops in the summer with Hampshire and the consultants undertaking that work, and there's a further workshop coming up next Thursday late afternoon. I think all members have been invited, but if they haven't, then please drop me a line and I'm happy to make sure you get invites to that.
Thank you, Mark. Before we go into questions, I just want to say under 3.9, I am very, very disappointed, okay, that we're limiting ourselves in the mass rapid transport purely to buses. Okay, there are far better solutions. I think buses are a bit of a cop out, to be fair. Okay, and I just want that on record. Okay, so Councillor Konesko, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Bound and Mark for that. I mean, I look at this. I think it's been over 2 years since we adopted this transport strategy, and we're still at the phase where some important studies are being completed. MRT, which I know when it was first presented, I think like Councillor Frost, I was quite excited to see what possibilities this could bring, and obviously we're still at the point where HCC is looking at potential routes, which feels like very early days, and restricting itself to buses. So really two questions follow from that. One is, have Hampshire given us an indication as to why it's taken so long to get to where we are now, sort of 2 years down the track, and there's little concrete that's been completed. And then secondly, I think as has been identified, some of the ongoing studies have to be incorporated into the transport assessment, which then gets incorporated into the local plan update. I don't want to reopen the debate about the timings of the local plan, because I think we've discussed that enough. But how confident are we that the transport assessment is going to be ready in good time so we can properly consider it as part of the local plan update, given that the elements that feed into it still seem to be very much a work in progress?
Thank you. Just picking up the first point around the MRT and the work behind it, there is a significant amount of work that's been taking place by Hampshire to work out the kind of frequencies required to support a service. There's been liaison with Stagecoach as a potential operator, and there's been work undertaken in terms of sites and availability of land to service bus lanes and that kind of infrastructure that's required. So there's been a fair bit of number crunching that perhaps isn't perhaps obvious to councillors. So, but there is a fair amount of work that's taken place to date, and that's been used to inform the bus service improvement plan that I mentioned that's recently been submitted. The second question around the TA and the local plan, again, all the information and all the studies that are being undertaken is being fed into the process and passed on to our consultants who will undertake that transport assessment for us. So, again, I think it's been a case of making sure that all the work we're undertaking is coordinated and fed into that transport assessment at the right time. So I'm feeling confident that things will happen accordingly, and we're working closely with colleagues at county and internally in the local plan team.
If I may, just a very quick supplementary in that case, when do you think the transport assessment will be ready for us to, as councillors to review?
And I think it's the intention to make sure that it's available when you're taking decisions on sites or giving comments on sites early next year, that it's available at that stage to give you that certainty that the sites can be delivered and that sites can be mitigated or improvements made on the infrastructure to support those new developments.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Laura James, please.
So it's picking up on that point in relation to 1.5 is in asking for our comments on sites in relation to the local plan. Clearly work is being done in relation to that, and so it's almost we were told, you know, there's not a definite this site isn't going to go forward, but the reality is this piece of work is going on in relation to each one of those sites, and that I suppose that concerns me really. And we're not going to see the transport study until just before the draft Reg 18. You know, so that I have grave concerns about that. That's one of my first. I've got lots of comments and questions.
I think it's worth saying, isn't it, and not to repeat a conversation that we've had many times, there's a reality, isn't it, that says what we have heard loud and clear is you want evidence. Actually, you have evidence by running the study. The study looks at the quantum of the development. It doesn't necessarily knock individual sites in or out, which I know this committee would quite like it to do, but actually it looks at quantum and it doesn't block sites necessarily. It looks at where infrastructure development and improvement is required. And, you know, we can have a constant debate about chicken and egg and which came first, but actually there's a reality that says the preparatory work for those decisions pre-Reg 18 are absolutely running a transport assessment, looking at the quantum of development in different parts, which is what we're undertaking now.
Thank you. My next question is around 2.2, and it's around Horizons 2050. That document is all about growth, and it's about significant growth. And at full council, we voted against that. And it's a dichotomy really in relation to what is in this Horizons 2050 and now what we want as a council. And I just wondered, you know, it's quite a discredited document really now.
I'm not sure I'd agree with the characterisation actually that would say, is it about growth? Well, it's about the impact of growth and what we want from growth. What we rejected was a very specific number and a very large quantum of growth, and the Horizon 2050 document is very broad and covers many subjects about almost the 2050. There's going to be an element of growth in our borough and what we expect it to deliver. And you know what, lots of things that we've spent a lot of time talking about already, whether it be climate change, whether it be transport, whether it be about modal shift, whether it be about health inequalities, whether it be about education attainment, all of those things are also in Horizon 2050 with a change in the size of the population between when the Horizon 2050 document was written and 2050, and I think those things still apply.
Thank you. And also the Horizon 2050 did also go on about mass rapid transport not being buses.
It did say not buses, absolutely.
Can I ask what in relation to 2.3 is in relation to, and it makes reference to this throughout the report, the 15-minute neighbourhoods?
That's a relatively new concept that's that's kind of becoming widely known in the transport planning field, but it's around creating communities where you're able to access services and facilities on site without having to necessarily travel too far off site. So things are generally accessible within 15 minutes walk or cycle on major sites. So effectively they consume their own smoke. So you have the services and facilities you need day to day to meet your needs effectively. So that's a new concept that we expect to see fleshed out in more detail in the local transport plan 4 produced by Hampshire when it comes out after Christmas.
Thank you. Thank
So
you.
in
Sorry,
relation to
sorry,
no, in
Councillor
relation
James.
to the site,
No,
we're
no,
just
no,
picking up
Councillor
that.
James. No, please.
I just want to pick up on that comment.
You've had quite a lot of questions. I've got other people here. I will come back to you so you can get your comments on record. Okay, Councillor Dillo, please.
I agree with you, Councillor Frost. I think that a bus strategy for mass rapid transport is very short-sighted. I think we should be far more looking forward, a better vision than buses, to be quite honest. And if they are buses, surely we'd be looking at electric vehicles or something like that. But why we have to go down the bus route, no pun intended, I'm a little bit exasperated, to be honest.
I think it's the intention that buses would be the starting point, and obviously technology will evolve over time, and so we may see electrically powered buses over time. We may see a role for technology in some kind of autonomous vehicle. We don't know where the future will take us, but certainly there are some pilots around the country which may, result in improvements in Basingstoke in time. But that's the approach that I think we feel or Hampshire and ourselves feel is appropriate, given the nature of the town, the density of development and the routes served. I think what the really intention of the bus routes is to give us the journey reliability that we need. It's making sure the journeys people can depend on getting on a bus, and it gets you to your destination in a given period without being limited by congestion. It reduces your journey time, and potentially it's on a vehicle that is in time zero emissions or lower emissions than a car.
Thank you, Mark. But I will come to you in a minute. But I just struggle to see it. Okay, I just struggle to see it with mass rapid transport. That the buses is just the easiest option for Hampshire County Council. They're not being visionary, and they should go back to the drawing board and think again. And I would like you to actually make that point very obvious to them in writing. Thank you.
We're very happy to do that, Chair. I think also thinking about what Mark said about it's a first step. For me, there's something about this first step that allows us to do which perhaps we haven't had the opportunity to do in the past, which is to have a much more direct, place-based conversation with Stagecoach. I think there's a reality in all of these conversations because I absolutely get that the committee may feel that there hasn't necessarily been much progress, but actually behind the scenes there's a lot of progress even in changing the nature of the relationship. So probably I would characterise the relationship with Stagecoach that we've had as a borough as being topping up some funding for their main client being Hampshire County Council, and hopefully this process allows us to change that relationship so that if we're looking at what our communities need, and actually those communities who need public transport, who may be more public transport friendly as far as making sure we get services which are sustainable, we can change the nature of that relationship, make it work, and then prove the case for something else.
Thank you, Councillor Bound. We will take this offline, okay, and I will register my disgust in words of many syllables. Okay. I'm just incandescent with rage right now, okay, over that. Okay, what I've got on the speakers list, I've got Councillor Vaux, then Councillor Laura James, and then Councillor McCormick. Okay, and Councillor Watt.
Thank you, Chair. So just continuing the bus thing a little bit further, when we had the big fleet opening a year or so ago, I talked to the bus management at the time, and they said the reason why electric didn't work for us was our bus routes were too long. Well, I would argue heartily that a rapid transit system is by definition pretty local in Basingstoke. Therefore, electric buses should work. And I think we should be, if we do have to have buses, we should insist that they are electric. Not wait until the fleet needs replacing. We should be saying this new transport system should be electric. We have a climate emergency and we need to improve our air quality. All of the reasons, why not do it now? I wanted also to ask about in 3.6, slightly horrified with the potential possibility of electrifying the rail line between Basingstoke and Reading, because it's such an eyesore. I mean, one of the things we have to say about the railway line between Reading and Basingstoke is it's in a lot of cuttings. There's a lot of places where it's well hidden and well disguised. It's not a blot on our landscape. Putting up electric pylons all the way through that is going to, well, my words, destroy a lot of our countryside. So could you help us? So you probably don't know, so don't, you know, but how does it improve connectivity by electrifying it? If you know, if you don't know, fair enough. But do you know why it would improve it? Sorry.
It's partially a speed thing, because it gives you that increased speed to get the trains moving and therefore increase the capacity of the line. But to be honest, it's a long-term aspiration to provide electrification from Southampton to the Midlands on that particular line. And I'm not sure if you're kind of familiar with the state of the rail industry, but electrification at the moment isn't top of the list. So I think it's one of these projects that's been talked around for some time, but is currently on the back burner.
I just want to answer on the aesthetics. As the son of a railwayman, I feel obliged to share some knowledge that I have absorbed, which is, of course, electrification doesn't necessarily mean pylons, because, of course, in the southern network, it's third rail. On the Great Western, it's pylons. So I'm not sure we know which one it would be.
I think it would be overhead, because they're overhead all around Reading, and they would keep it in the same format. But I mean, it really isn't something. I mean, I'm all for climate emergency. I'm all for electrification if it's required and all that kind of thing. But we need to find a better solution. Let's hope the ground rail or some other solution comes up before they think about electrifying that rail line, because it would be a travesty.
Thank you. And also just to say that obviously it would affect the height of traffic going through places like Bramley. Okay, so it's really very important. I'm quite happy with a ground rail, okay, scenario. I think pylons would just, well, it would go and destroy the countryside. Okay, Councillor Laura James, I'd like you to come back with your comments, please. Thank you.
Move on, but because I've got lots of others, but I would like to refer to 3.1 in the report. Can I just talk about, I suppose, the bits that are not missed out here is really in relation to we're talking about between junctions 7 and 8, but what I want to refer to is the motorway and how it changes in relation to the lanes. And is there any reference to that and how that impacts on this whole area? And also in relation to the design manual for roads and bridges, it requires and talks about where there are problems with weaving of distances in traffic, that we need to have link roads. And there is no such link here. How are we going to overcome that? I see that the report is going to be concluded in late 2021. When will the technical report be available to the public? Is that going to be lasting like everything else, or are they going to get sight of that? Are you, as this piece of work, considering and looking at the funeral corteges that are travelling on the road and using this area? I also, I shall leave it at that and come back in a minute. I've got lots more.
Yes, please.
I'll try and answer each of your questions. I might come back to you on your first point just to clarify a little bit around that. But in terms of I'll start with the weaving point and the distance between the junctions. I think it's acknowledged that the distance between 7 and 8 is substandard compared to recent design guidance, and if it were to be built today, the distance between the two junctions would be longer than it currently is. So that's within the scope of the study which recognises that there is a potential safety issue there, and looks at potential remedies down the line as to how we could fix that. So that's something that is being looked at in the study referred to in 3.1. In terms of the funeral parties and processions, etc., I think the study is making use of the North Hampshire transport model, which is quite strategic in nature. So it won't necessarily look at smaller events that happen on the network. It will look at the general flows and the general sense of what's happening. So it wouldn't perhaps pick up that kind of thing in so much detail, but they are obviously aware that there is the crematorium and the potential cemetery in that location. So that's flagged up to the consultants. I wonder if I could come back to you on your first point about lanes. I didn't quite.
So in relation to there's immediate reductions in relation to the M3, in relation to 3 lanes into 2, and the impact on traffic and how that is going to have an impact on the weaving of traffic in M3 lanes, 1 across the A303. And so what I'm concerned is in relation to 6, 7 and 8, the impact further on in relation to the reduction of lanes is impacted further on this, and then we've got further weaving. Am I making myself sense?
Just so I'm clear, are you saying that between junction 6 and 7 it's 3 lanes, and once you get past junction 8 it goes down to 2 lanes? I think that's recognised again in the study because they're looking at general capacity issues. The study is looking between junction 6 and 8 effectively, and I don't think Highways England have flagged up any particular concerns around capacity beyond junction 8, but the study itself is 6 to 8 with a focus around 7.
So in relation to when we're talking about Southwood Corner, is that in relation to the major access to Many Down South? Is that what we're looking at there? And is that considering the access to issue to that development?
The study that's being undertaken is, if you recall, the vision document that was adopted earlier this year by the council of potential development scenarios around junction 7. It's looking at what could come forward in and around junction 7 in order to test where the breaking point is, what would happen if junction 7 becomes overloaded, and what kind of mitigation you would need to remedy that.
And the other one is in relation to there's no link to rail freight interchange. Is that something that should be considered, or is it? Are you considering it?
It's not specifically in the scope of the study because that particular area isn't served by rail as such, so it's not within the scope of the current study that's being undertaken.
Thank you very much. Councillor McCormack.
Right, thank you, Chair. So, I had questions in 3 areas actually. The first one was the North Hampshire and Thames Valley multimodal study. I think this is something that has been in the long grass for decades. We know there's capacity issues on the A33. We also know there's capacity issues on the railway. Just picking up on Councillor Vaux's point, in terms of the visual intrusion of overhead catenaries, I don't think you're going to get very far with that, because the West Coast Main Line goes through some really spectacular parts of Cumbria and Scotland, and it's been like that for many decades, and it hasn't really attracted much in the way of criticism of the impact of that landscape. And also in and around the Bramley area, we've got a junction point on the national grid, so we've got lots of much bigger pylons in the area anyway, but that's beside the point. I'm a bit disappointed really at the lack of progress. I'm really hoping that if we've got all the councils that there are involved, that they will come up with a solution, not least including building the new railway stations, which we talked about for years, and which we need to do something to try and promote modal shift. But my real concern is it doesn't mention there the potential impact of 15,000 homes at Risley and what that would have on the A33, and whether that would mean building another station further up, which would jeopardise Chinham, when Chinham was promised as a station when they built the area around Chinham North. I have some concerns about that. That's my first question. Second question, MRT, point's been well made about buses, lack of vision. I'd just like to also have this committee record, when you look at the area around Junction 7 of the M3 and Many Down South, the road access to Basingstoke the options are very limited. You've got Pat Lane, which you can't do much with. You've got the Worthing Road, which is going to have many down north built on top of it. And you've got the A30, which has already got over 1,000 houses in the pipeline, 2,000 houses with Longacre, Hounsdon Fields and the golf course, although the golf course, only part of it's being built because of sewage capacity issues, but that's another story. We're going to cram all these, potentially 9,500 houses, and irrespective of whether you have a mass rapid transit bus system or not, that road is going to be completely choked and it's not going to cope. I don't see any evidence that Hampshire have really thought through the implications of that and what they would have to do. Given their track record, it's taken them 20 years to talk about putting cycle provision on the A30, and they're only part way there. So what confidence can we have in the appropriateness of a mass rapid transit system on a bus on our existing roads? It doesn't, to me, seem an attractive option. Cycling, yes, although once you get above 5 miles, I think even cycling, you've got to be keen to do that twice a day, to and from your place of work. And also on that, the bus service improvement plan. We recently had a big fanfare about these new buses, Go Greener. I think the Lib Dems nicked that slogan as well for their election manifesto. But Blue Motion buses are not very green. That's sort of, 10-year-old technology. And now they've invested in the fleet, they're going to want to keep it for another 5 years. But we've got a 2030 commitment to have a carbon neutral borough. So when are we going to get electric buses across the whole of our fleet, let alone just an MRT? So that's my second point. And a third one, it's my final one, I promise. Electric vehicle charging infrastructure. This is really for the portfolio holder. I had a case come through this week about somebody who lives in Brighton Hill who's buying an electric car. We get more and more people in Basingstoke getting electric cars. And in our new town estates, Brighton Hill being a prime example, this particular gentleman is about 70 metres from his nearest parking space out the front of his house. And I can't see how he can run a cable that distance without having significant issues, possibly having to put in a ground spike on council land. The alternative is that he parks the car out the back of his garden on council land, which is currently grass, and this is a practice that's discouraged. If you look at a lot of our new town estates like Winklebury, Brighton Hill, you've got problems in many areas where people are driving on the grass around a back gate for their own convenience. But if that's the only option that they've got, because that's the only way they can run a cable out to charge the car, and although we had a presentation that I was at with the climate emergency map, and we have a charger plan, it's been years in the making, and in the next year we're going to reach places like Chequers Road, and our outlying estates will be 3 to 5 years' time. So would the portfolio holder work with me in arriving at a solution for this resident that we can expediently roll out across the borough? Because in the next 3 years we're going to see lots of people buying electric cars, and I really don't think the infrastructure that we are talking about now is going to be available in time. Thank you.
I think I've got a note of all the questions, but if I miss one of the points out, do prompt me. I think the first point was around the other authority areas in the A33 study, let's call it, and the 15,000 homes at Risley. All the other partner authorities have fed into that exercise the number of homes they expect to come forward in their area, or an estimation of those. So those will be fed in. I think there's some uncertainty in my mind about whether Risley is happening or not, but I can't confirm that for sure, but I can let you know outside the meeting if that's helpful. The second point was around the MRT and whether it's going to be attractive to users or not, given the road capacity to the southwest of the town. I think the bus lanes that are proposed and the journey time reliability is really intended to make sure that people do have that as a viable option to using the car for their journeys to work. I think combined with 15-minute neighbourhoods, sites beginning to consume their own smoke effectively and have services and facilities locally, perhaps with more people working at home, would mean that there are fewer journeys into the town centre from that part of the town. You mentioned the new bus fleet that was introduced a couple of years back, and the fact it's Euro 6, which is the latest kind of standard in terms of conventional technology. It does have stop features and that kind of thing, so it's as good as you can get in that sense. But Councillor Bound mentioned the conversations we're having with Stagecoach, and I think we'd be keen to explore further with them the scope for changing the fleet in future, given part of the wider dialogue we're having. And then finally, you talked about the electric vehicle charging points and your study in your example in Brighton Hill. We are having some good conversations with Hampshire. We're beginning to look more closely now at on-street parking provision, having focused in the past on the car parks in the town and our own estate. I think we're keen to work with colleagues in the council in terms of other opportunities. So I think that's something we'll be pursuing, and we're keen to bring back to this committee an electric vehicle charging strategy of sorts in the spring of next year. So hopefully we can talk again about this particular point.
Thank you, Mark. The only thing I would say in response to what you've just said regarding the MRT and buses, there are a lot of maybes and ifs. Okay, there wasn't a lot of substance there. Okay, I appreciate you don't have the detail now. I'm still incandescent with rage that Hampshire County Council are considering buses. Okay, when there are so much better options. Okay, which will actually free up the roads. Okay, yeah. So anyway, thank you, Councillor McCormack. I'd like to move on to Councillor Watts, please. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, it's just as there was something addressed to portfolio holder, I think it would be more appropriate, if I may say, to pick it up with, and I'm quite happy to refer it, but I know you're more than able for the portfolio holder for natural environment and climate improvement, because I know EV charging is something that's very specific to his portfolio, and I have quite a lot of sympathy for that pain for your resident, Andy, because I find myself in exactly the same situation as far as not having a car parking space particularly close to anywhere that I can plug it into my property. So I think it's one of those problems that, you know, it's good to have a problem which is one of the most difficult things to resolve, isn't it, for residents?
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Watts, please.
Thank you, Chair. 3.1, the various highway authorities commissioned a strategic impact assessment, which is just intended to input for the transport assessment to sort of look at all the development that's happening around Junction 7. I know I'd want to rework the arguments for which we've lost on this side, where we think coaching horses and all that. But will this transport assessment say 9,000 houses near Junction 7, it's going to be extremely difficult to do, and you need to mitigate it by doing this and that? Will we get that sort of detail? Because I think that's really important. Or is you just going to say, yeah, we can do it, you know, without any firm plans like we've had in the last 25 years, you know, we're getting more and more congested on our roads. That's the first sort of point. I don't know if you want to answer that one. I can carry on. Yeah, and the second one was rapid transport. I mean, obviously our Prime Minister is a bus enthusiast. You know, it's ironic that they've asked Hampshire County Council for an improvement plan for our buses, as that we as a borough put more into buses in Basingstoke than Hampshire County Council does. Surely they should be asking us for our input, you know, because we, you know, if it wasn't for this borough, we wouldn't be having the bus services which we've got. And it's ironic that we cut our shuttle bus 6 months ago when the government's looking for an improvement plan. And at the time when we cut that shuttle bus, we were going to be promised a mass rapid transport device scheme by the end of this year. So that didn't work out then, did it? Going on to cycling and walking, I know I'm probably going to upset the Brighton Hill members at the moment, but there's some work going on there at the moment for a cycle link. How strategic is that? Because we already had an adequate footpath that could contain cyclists and walkers. How is that strategic when that money could be better spent elsewhere in the borough with to improve the provision what we already have. I've just taken Harrow Way, which is in the Brighton Hill ward. We've got cycle lane, then not cycle lane, then cycle lane. We've got an adequate going down. I think what that road is now, Brighton Way, whatever it is. How strategic is that? Who made that decision?
I think I've got 3 questions there. So I'll start off with the Junction 7 question, which was what if a quantum of homes is identified there, and what are the likely outcomes of that study? I think what the study is really looking at, what can be accommodated there as a kind of a maximum, and then I think it will identify a solution to that, and it will give us a range of mitigation measures such that we can work with Highways England, or as they're now called National Highways, to secure funding if that's what's needed in the future to support development. So it's taking a long-term look, really, the kind of long-term strategic infrastructure that we need to be doing, and saying really what will be needed to serve that kind of area for the longer term, such that we can start to program that into external funding sources such as the Department for Transport and other government bodies. The second point was around the bus service improvement plan, whether that's Hampshire focused alone. It's something that all counties and unitaries have to provide. It's a requirement of the, I think it was called Building Back Better or something, a government document that came out last year placed this onus on all transport bodies to undertake. So that's Hampshire's response to it, and it was submitted at the end of October. We didn't have formal input, but some officers were able to have privy to the draft, so we had some comments to make in that sense. And the final point was around the Brighton Hill scheme and what the benefits of that are. It's linking the centre with the improvements that will be made at the roundabout in time. So it's providing that latest standards cycleway. It's designed to the very latest design standards that come out from government, technically called LTN 120, which is effectively your gold standard in that sense. And it will be built to those particular standards. So you'll see a completely segregated cycleway from the footway. The existing footway wasn't officially open to cyclists, even if they may have used it informally. They shouldn't have been doing so. So this is what we expect to see going forward in the future across the borough.
Thank you very much, Mark. Do you have anything to add there, Councillor? Okay, I'd like to go to Councillor Dillo, please.
Going back to EV charging, I see in 3.22 that we're looking to start some pilot projects on street charging. I think we really need to crack on with those, because obviously on street charging points are going to be the make or break for the majority of people to get an EV car. And maybe rather than just going away and doing our own little pilot scheme, we should be looking to talk to Newbury Council, who are already doing one, and also Portsmouth. They're doing quite a large scheme of on-street charge points as a pilot scheme, and I think it would speed it up so that we could find out how well they're doing. Just going off and doing our own little pilot scheme all on our own, I think we should be getting information from nearby borough and town councils as well, because I think time it's we've just got to get going. And I think Councillor McCormack talking about a resident in his area, you can't charge a car. That's just ridiculous, really. And there's so many ways of doing it as well. You can retrofit lampposts, you can have bollards that look really, really nice in Victorian streets and things like that. And also I'm expecting, obviously, new build areas like Manydown will, without a doubt, have on-street EV charging points.
So to say, I agree with all 3 points you've made there. I think, we are looking to move this forward as quickly as we can now. We really recognise the benefits of supporting our residents who don't have off-street parking, and there are a number of roads in the town and the wider borough where that's the case. Keen to learn from others. Hampshire have already undertaken some pilots in Winchester and Eastleigh, so we're learning from their experience more locally. And yes, exactly. I think new developments going forward, we will look to review our parking standards as part of the local plan update in time. they'll be more stringent on requiring that new developments make provision for parking, electric vehicle charging infrastructure. But I understand that colleagues in our development management team are already securing planning conditions that secure electric vehicle charging on larger sites. So those kind of things are in hand, but I think we're looking to beef them up as much as we can going forwards.
Thank you, Mark. Any comments, portfolio? Okay, Councillor Mahaffey, please, or Mahoney.
Smith. I'll withdraw my question, Chair. I've just been covered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Carr, please.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for sort of pushing the County Council, because in my dealings with them in other matters, they have a sort of rather a south-mouth tendency, and they do need to be pushed hard to pay attention to North Hampshire. So as much as you can do to speed them up, because a lot of these things should have happened quite some time ago, as much as you can do to push them is welcome. An absence I noted from the report was the approach to, now you've got the 339, you've got the 33, but the one thing that seems to be missing is the 343, which goes up my ward of Evangar in the approach to Newbury. And West Berkshire Council have, there are plans afoot about Sandalford, a very large development just north of, my people in Highclere and in East Woody, and there is concern, especially regarding developers' aspirations for the gap, say, between Highclere and Berkeley and the edge of Newbury, about the impact that will have on the 343. And so what I'm not seeing in this report is any reference to the 343 and the approach to Newbury. So what I'd like to know is, you're talking to West Berkshire, but are you talking to Berkshire about the approach from the south? Are you doing a current transport assessment on the 343 approach to Newbury as it stands at present and future growth? And is that going to look at the impact of development? Because it is a major concern for my people.
Thank you. As far as I'm aware, there's no current study being undertaken on the 343 in that vicinity. Obviously, Sandalford and other sites in the vicinity will need to undertake transport assessments to determine what the impact is on the local network. So if there is a concern that's being raised in that sense, then mitigation will need to be provided as a part of that application and development. So I think that's probably covered off in that sense. The studies that I've referred to in the report are ones where we have significant levels of growth taking place within our borough and elsewhere, and or where there's a safety concern that's been raised to the County Council in that sense. So I'm not aware that that's the case with the 343 specifically. I can test that with colleagues at Hampshire though to see if they've got a view.
Thank you.
That would be very much appreciated. I don't want the 343 to be missed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Laura James, please.
Raising about the mass rapid transport in relation to 39 and then going on to 311 in relation to the bus lanes, because I guess the mass rapid transport is also going to be bus lanes as well now. I suppose I just need to understand how they're going to work. I'm just concerned, are we going to take an existing part of the road, or is it going to be a new lane completely? Is there space within this for this to work? That's my first question. In relation to, I wanted to raise in relation to 3.18, lower parking provision with some forms of new development in the town centre. Do we know which car parks we're talking about yet? And it would be good to have an understanding about, have you identified those car parks that are going to be removed to enable a lower provision of car parking, and how that's going to work? Can we also talk about number?
Councillor James, can we just have those two questions answered first, and then we can come back to you for your third question, please? Thank you.
So just in terms of the space for bus lanes effectively, and what kind of requirement that would be, whether it would take out road space for existing road users, I think the intention and the work we mentioned earlier that Hampshire have been undertaking is looking at the space that's available within the highway that isn't currently highway. So it's I think the recognition from Hampshire is that you wouldn't want to be stealing too much room from the existing traffic to provide a bus lane. So it's looking at where there's verges or wide roads, which is often the case in many of the situations in Basingstoke where the roads were planned with a wide highway boundary around them. So that's where I think Hampshire have been focusing their efforts. Just in terms of the second point you raised around the car parks and the town centre, what we've been trying to do is to align the work of the parking strategy with the outputs from Allies and Morrison and the town centre work that's going on elsewhere in the council, and looking at the opportunities that they're identifying to see where car parks could be consolidated and put together in time. So that's where that comment is referring to.
Do we know which of those which car parks you're referring to at this stage?
Yeah, forgive me, I don't know. I can't recall the exact names of the car parks because they've all got individual names. But it's the top of town car parks and whether they could be put together. So there's Central Car Park. I think there's Castons. I'd have to come back to you outside the meeting to confirm, but I can provide you with copies of extract from the town centre work if that's helpful.
Thank you. Councillor James, have you got...
So in relation to point 4, in relation to the public, in relation to councillors and their update in relation to this transport study, it says at this stage there is no reasonable alternatives to reporting to members in this manner, and the ward council will continue to be consulted on as local issues arise or in or close to their ward as appropriate. What does as appropriate mean? You know, and at what stage will they be consulted? It would be quite nice that it's at an earlier stage before the decision is taken. I wonder if we could think about that whole area. I suppose it concerns me really. And the other one is in relation to climate change. It says progressing with the implementation of the transport strategy is likely to have a positive impact. I don't want the word likely. Surely it's got to be seen that it will have, and that's appalling if we're going to do all this. It is likely to have. I think we've got to be much more ambitious than that, and considering where we are, I think we've got to change that really.
Just picking up your first point about engaging members about particular projects coming forward in their ward or close to their ward, I think you're absolutely right. It's very important and fundamental that we engage locally to make sure it's the right solution. And I think as projects and proposals come forward, that would be the case in order to ensure that it works, because you've obviously got greater knowledge of things on the ground in your particular area. In terms of the reference to climate change, I think it's likely to, because these things aren't fully mapped out yet. And I think it's the case that if these things do happen, then they would have an impact on climate change. It would be a beneficial impact, but we don't want to be too concrete yet because these things aren't fully defined. That's why we've included that uncertainty there.
Thank you, Mark. I just have to say that I tend to agree with Councillor James that if we're doing all this stuff and it's costing so much money, because it is, okay, I certainly want an impact, okay, on climate change, and I want a positive impact on climate change and air quality, and I want a decent mass rapid transport system, which does not include, you know, the diesel buses. And I'm sorry to harp on about it, but you know, I will do so. And anyway, finally, I've got Councillor McCormack.
Actually, I think I've all the things that I wanted to ask have been covered by other councillors, so I'll defer at this point.
Thank you very much. It is coming up for 21-25, so I'd like to suspend standing orders for till say 9:45, so we can get the work programme sorted out. Do I have agreement from everybody? Great, thank you very much. Does anybody else have any final questions, okay, regarding the transport strategy? Anybody? Okay. Obviously, if anyone does have...
I look forward to seeing the transport study as soon as we can get it.
I look forward to seeing mass rapid transport. Okay, but if anybody does have a question outside of the meeting, okay, I'm sure that Mark and Councillor Bound will be more than happy to take that. Okay, and we'll go from there. So thank you very much, Councillor Bound, and also Mark. It's a bit of a marathon session, but Thank you very much for your information. Right. Okay. Not long now, members. Okay, if we just pull through the agenda item number 8, which is the work programme. Okay, obviously we've got the 4th of November, which is we've just done. Okay, and thank you very much for everyone's questions and input. It is much appreciated by the portfolio holders and officers. On the 18th of November, okay, we're going to have a local plan update where I'm being advised at the moment it's the outcomes of settlement study work and the role of rural villages, including the quantum of development, outcomes of meetings with town and parish councils, and essay of different settlement levels, okay, and the future role of neighbourhood planning. I see it as being sorry, Councillor Laura James.
It was just, could we ask for from the portfolio holder what he at that meeting what he's done in relation to exceptional circumstances with government? You know, I'd like to ask for an update at that meeting. What work has he done, and give us an update really.
I'm sure that will be covered. Okay, and also with the housing numbers, I'm assuming, you know, what's he been doing. Okay, have we got that down? Yeah, great. Okay, so we'll pass that on so we can have a little bit of a preamble as to exactly what's being done. Okay, I see the 18th of November being a really, really busy evening. I think the number of speakers, okay, that will be at that meeting will potentially exceed the 30 speakers that we had, okay, when we were discussing the sites at the local area. So please be aware that I do have a couple of dates that we can adjourn to if we need to. One is the 25th of November. Okay. Sorry, what's the? Oh, sorry, no, 25th of November. Okay, and then the 2nd of December. So, well, I'm sorry, you'll have to be inspired to actually come to EPH. Okay, but those are currently are the 2 dates that I have in reserve. I think we'll just use one of them, hopefully. But if you can please entreat any parish council, okay, who wants to speak there, by all means they're welcome, okay, but and I will give them the full allotted time, but can they please ensure that any argumentations they've got for sides are sent in writing, okay, either to the local plan update or to Ruth or Mailer, so that we can put them into the evidence base, and then they can keep repeating the same argumentation time and time again, because we need to ensure that everybody's heard. But yeah, so I see that as being quite a long meeting. Okay, so if people want comfort breaks, let me know. Okay, and we'll take it from there. Moving over the page. Okay, we then have on the 6th of January a local plan update, which again you can see the details there. Update on the spatial strategy and town centre strategy project. Suggested list of housing allocations, which is going to be quite contentious, I suspect. Suggested site allocation policies where ready, and a cumulative impact of suggested allocations with a high level spatial outcomes of the economic needs assessment. Again, I'm being told that work will be ready for the 8th of January. Okay, it will be
ready for the 6th.
Yeah, ready. Oh, sorry, the 6th of January. I beg your pardon. Sorry, I've not got my glasses with me. And if necessary, I will try and get another date. Okay, I'll try and get another date in case we have to have a second meeting, an adjourned meeting on that one. Councillor Carr.
On a point of clarity, the suggested housing allocations, will they be divided between sort of around the town and then rural as we've done before, or will they be done all in one go?
I don't actually know. I think it will be, it says here, suggested site allocation policies where ready. I know the work isn't ready yet, okay, but I think, when it is ready, it will be brought forward for us to look at and review and comment. If the site allocation policies are only half ready, but they're ready in, say, the urban area and not in the rural, then we will go with just the urban areas. If both are ready, then we'll go with both sets. And consequently, if the rural area is ready but the urban area isn't, then we'll go with that. Okay, so you can see where I'm going here, and then we can push for the remainder to be at another date. Okay, so that's sorry, Councillor James.
It just at that's the 6th. Will we have the water study? Will we have the transport study, and the other studies?
I do not know at this precise time. Okay, I've been told that the water study, the work is ongoing. Okay, and I'm told that the transport assessment, well, you heard it here, the transport strategy, okay, will be ready in early January. Whether it will be ready for our meeting, I do not know at this particular time. But I can make inquiries. Yeah. Certainly, Councillor Mahaffey.
Can I just go back to the last meeting, the local plan update? Sure. Last time we had this, we had 29 speakers, 28 of which said exactly the same thing, and then we had the leader of the council say completely the opposite, which was the only interesting thing in the evening, to be honest. Could we possibly try and manage this time? Because there are certain things that we know and we all agree on. That, number one, 17,500 homes is too many. We all agree that the infrastructure is overstretched and we need to be led by infrastructure. And there's a number of things that we're all agreed on. Could we possibly write to the prospective speakers and say, we know these things, please don't 28 of you or however many turn up and say exactly the same thing. Could you restrict your comments to site specific or something that's outside this particular field?
Okay, before I go to Councillor James, I'll say no, okay, because it's a democratic process, okay, and speakers are entitled to come and speak to the meeting, okay, and speak to the items. Yeah, the only thing I will say is that I will make sure that people do speak to the paper, okay. I think it's vitally important, and if we have 30 speakers all come in and say the same thing, I'm sorry, that's democracy. We have 30 people come in and say the same thing. I would love, I would love to be able to restrict it.
I'm not trying to impede democracy.
No,
I'm just trying to say that there are certain things that we already recognise and we've acknowledged.
Sure.
I'm just trying to avoid repetition.
No, I understand that, but it is speakers' right to actually say that, okay? And if we end up having 30 odd speakers, okay, and only having half an hour's worth of debate, okay, then that's what the adjourned date is for. So I'm a big believer in democracy here, okay, and I'm sure we are, and I take your suggestion in the spirit that it's offered, but no, okay, I will be allowing people to say almost what they like, but as long as it's connected to that paper, okay. So sorry. So we had the 6th of January, Councillor James. We had the water study, and what was the other one you wanted me to? The transport. That's it. Transport. Thank you.
The transport. There's the employment study. I think there's the environmental study. There's quite a few outstanding.
I think they will come through. Let me find out about the water study and the transport study first. Okay, and just keep it going from there. So we have the 6th of January. Okay, which is going to be a huge meeting. And then on the 27th of January, we have the Authority Monitoring Report, okay, to discuss the outcomes of the AMR on planning matters. And we also have the Infrastructure Funding Statement, which, again, will both be, stunningly interesting. Okay, and then moving... Sorry, Councillor Koneski.
Sorry, can I just make a point about the AMR? Because from memory, when we debated this at the start of this calendar year, my understanding is that the AMR is published at the end of December, because legally we have to do that. And I think we mentioned at the time that it seemed odd that we were talking and having a session
Yeah.
about the AMR a month after it had been published, whereas actually it should be before. And I appreciate the calendar's looking quite full, but it seems a bit pointless debating a document that is already in the public domain and we can't do anything to influence again.
Sure, I think it's quite specific because I actually had a conversation with Councillor Jones, who's chair of scrutiny, and actually said that in reality this 1 year it may be better for scrutiny to actually take the. I know you object, Councillor James, but we don't actually see it before it comes out. Okay, so therefore this 1 year, because we have the local plan update, I was pushing it there, and I got his agreement to it. Okay, so this is purely to discuss the AMR on planning matters. Okay, so it's quite restrictive,
the AMR is, or everything about the AMR is about planning, isn't it, and economics, and it's essential. And what we did say at the last meeting, and Andy's right, that we were going to have this come before it was sent off because we had concerns, but it's essential that this committee has sight of that and is able to influence that document before it's been sent off.
This document, when I spoke to legal, because of the fact that it's more of a scrutiny issue, it should go to the scrutiny committee. The fact that it always comes to EPH is a historical thing, okay, but it should in reality go to scrutiny. Councillor Jones and his committee look at all these things, okay, and they actually look at they look at these things and what's happened in the past. We are actually a forward-looking policy committee. Okay, you can shake your head or not, as the case may be, but that's what we're designed to be. Okay, so therefore the AMR should not come to this committee. It should go to scrutiny. That is the proper place for it.
We are a scrutiny because we're an overview and scrutiny, so we scrutinise policy. The reality is that if we don't know where, in relation to lots of those performance issues, we won't know how to move forward in relation to planning. It's such a fundamental piece of the work that we do, and it hasn't always gone here. It hasn't gone anywhere. We had to really fight for it to come to this committee.
But this committee is not the right place for it. If you're looking at the AMR, okay, then unfortunately you're looking at what has happened, okay, and the levels of how well the council has performed. That is an overviewing scrutiny area. That is not an area that should be dealt with by this committee. Basically, what should happen is the AMR should go to scrutiny first. It'll be scrutinised, and then the results of that should come here. Okay, and we can take it from that direction, because then we can look at what's been scrutinised, where we've fallen down, and then we can hold portfolio holders and say, right, what are we going to do about it? That's the true, okay, way of accessing, and studying the authority monitoring report. But it is a scrutiny function, and that's why I did pass it over to Councillor Jones for him to scrutinise. Okay, that's what I did. Yes, it's coming to us in January, okay, so that we can discuss the outcomes, okay, of scrutiny on planning matters as we've got there. Okay, so we have that paper, and then we have the infrastructure funding statement, which comes to us, okay, on an annual basis from Mark. We've got that on the 27th of May, and then there doesn't seem to be anything until the 3rd of March, okay, which is the local plan update, just before we go into, or potentially start looking at going into the elections and the run up there. Okay, so again, I think the 3rd of March will be a long meeting, okay, because it will be the draft regulation version of the local plan update, okay, and will include policies and site-specific allocations. And I strongly suspect that what we'll have there is we'll have the 30 sets of speakers that spoke at the urban, the urban sites, and then we will have however many number of people that went to speak about the rural sites. So we'll get everyone in together, which could be quite interesting. So we may need to have an adjournment date from there. Okay, the rest of the work programme, climate change policies relating to the local plan are to be decided. Okay, we need to try and get those in before the local plan's actually gone out to consultation. We then have COVID-19 motion, review of the motion. I've spoken to the leader, you know, and he'll be more than willing to actually give us something to read out. But there won't be a paper per se. There will be just an update. Then we have the Economic Recovery Board, okay, and the report on the work of the board to date. Again, because of the local plan, I think we're just going to have to leave that as to be decided, and maybe following the next municipal year, along with the local enterprise partnership and also the housing green conversion motion. That's all to be decided. So that's where we are with the work programme, because I think the problem is we are, as we always say, we are absolutely chock-a-block with the local plan update. Okay, so has anybody got any comments? Apart from the AMR. Okay. Councillor Canasco.
At the risk of making myself very unpopular here, given we've got nothing planned currently for February, how would people feel if we decided to put a slot in February to discuss some of these things that are still to be decided? So note that the bottom one, the housing green conversion motion, is actually something that Councillor McCormick proposed, and it was sort of February 2021, February of this year, so it would have been a whole year before we've got to it, which I appreciate. We've got a lot on our plate with the local plan update, but it still seems 12 months to be sitting on the motion doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm happy to do so. Okay, is the appetite for the committee to have a meeting in February? Yes. Okay. Well, I know you're not going to be here, Sadie, but if you can make a note, okay, that we want a meeting in February. The climate change one will be coming forward. Okay, I strongly suspect that will be sometime. I think in early Feb or late January, because it's such an essential one that's needed for the local plan. So I just don't have date of a paper yet. Councillor James.
Can I just go back to the in relation to the authority monitoring report? Just remember, we are an economic planning and housing, so it can't be just about planning matters. So it has to be broader than what comes back. So it's about economic, and that report is about economics, and it's also about housing. So we should have anything that relates. I think the whole report, after it's been to scrutiny, needs to come back to us. Is for us to then see that report retrospective, because it would have been sent off.
What I'm hoping is that what we can actually get is the results of the scrutiny. Okay, so that forms the basis of the paper, and combined with the AMR, we can then move forward and start, questioning portfolio holders as to what exactly are they going to do to improve the AMR. Okay, and the performance of the council. So I'm fully supportive of the AMR being here, but the scrutiny of it has to be done at scrutiny and an overview. Okay, that's their function. Okay, but I'm happy to take the paper off of them. Okay, I know that CEP and Councillor Vaux here has done something very similar, where the actual scrutiny goes to the Scrutiny and Overview Committee, and then it's pushed over onto committee, to her committee, to actually take it forward and look forward based on the scrutiny of Councillor Jones's committee. Sorry.
So they won't, unless we can get it quickly.
I will sort that out because I had a word with. Just to put it on record. Okay, I spoke to Councillor Jones and also sent him an email. okay, confirming that, okay, and that was done right at the beginning of this year. Yeah, I'm just saying, so that he could actually grab hold of it. So I will take that up with him again. Okay, so if anybody else sorry.
Sorry, can we just clarify what's coming to the committee in February, please? The topics, thanks.
Yeah, okay, so that will be the climate change policies. Okay, and also the housing green conversion motion. If I can get something short, then I will do so with the others. Okay, but those are the two main ones that I want on that meeting. Okay. Everybody happy-ish? Okay. In that case, I'd like to close the meeting out. The time is 21:47.